Lee Hyran didn't even look up from her teacup. That was the part Naomi Caldwell would never forget. Not the ring on the other woman's finger. Not Hyun-woo's silence. Not the way the entire room seemed to rearrange itself around her humiliation, like furniture moved while she wasn't looking. It was the teacup. Hyran lifted it, sipped, set it down, and only then did she raise her eyes to the woman standing in her entryway with a suitcase full of gifts and a heart full of plans, and say, with the precise calm of someone dismissing a delivery driver who'd knocked on the wrong door, "You were never part of any arrangement we recognized." Naomi had flown 14 hours for this moment. She had spent her savings. She had told her mother, her best friend, her co-workers. She had believed every word Hyun-woo ever said, and the woman who just erased 18 months of her life didn't even put down her tea. If that had been you, standing in that doorway, what would you have done? If you're new here, subscribe and stay until the end, because this story is going to go places you absolutely did not see coming. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. I want to see far for this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. Naomi Caldwell had never been the kind of woman who chased anything she wasn't sure of. That was the thing people misunderstood about her. They looked at the fact that she'd flown to South Korea alone, bought a round-trip ticket she quietly hoped to change to one-way, packed a rolling suitcase with Korean snacks she'd researched online, a silk scarf for Hyun-woo's mother, and a leather-bound journal for his father, and they assumed she was reckless. Romantic in the dangerous way. The kind of woman who threw herself headfirst into things and cried about it later. She wasn't. Naomi was 30 years old, and she had spent 29 of those years being careful. She grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in southwest Atlanta with her mother and her grandmother, 2 women who worked hard and expected precision. Not perfection. Her grandmother was clear on that distinction. Perfect is for people who don't know what effort costs, she used to say, folding laundry at midnight with the television murmuring in the background. Precise is for people who respect themselves. Naomi respected herself. She'd put herself through college on partial scholarship and a part-time job at a hotel front desk, graduated with a degree in communications, and spent the next 7 years building a reputation as a brand strategist who could walk into a failing company's identity crisis and walk out with a roadmap. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. But she was good at her work, and she knew it, and that knowledge had always been enough of a foundation to stand on. She met Lee Hyun-woo at a branding conference in Atlanta 18 months before the morning that would rearrange everything. He was there representing his family's shipping company, a legitimate business, large and well-established, with offices in Busan and Seoul and a growing presence in the American Southeast. He'd been sitting in the back row of a panel she was moderating, and afterward he came up to ask a question that turned into a 40-minute conversation in the lobby, and then a dinner, and then a second dinner 2 days later when he extended his trip by 48 hours without mentioning it to his assistant until the restaurant reservation was already made. Hyun-woo was charming in the specific way of men who don't know they're charming. He asked real questions and listened to the answers. He laughed at things that were actually funny rather than performing amusement. And he had a habit of pausing before he spoke that made everything he said feel considered rather than automatic. Naomi had dated men who talked in straight lines, filling silence like it was a problem to be solved. Hyun-woo moved differently. He sat with things. She liked that about him. She liked it too much, probably. Long distance was not something Naomi had ever intended to do. She watched friends attempt it and had seen the particular slow erosion that distance created, the time zone math, the missed calls, the gradual replacement of actual presence with the performance of presence. She'd told herself it wasn't for her. And then Hyun-woo video called her from Busan at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, his Tuesday night, which was her early Tuesday morning, just to show her the view from his apartment window, because there was a fog coming in off the harbor, and he'd thought of her and didn't want to think of her alone. She answered in a headscarf and an old college sweatshirt, squinting at the screen. He said, "You look exactly like yourself." She didn't know why that was the thing that got her. But it did. 18 months. It was longer than some marriages. It was long enough to know someone's sleep schedule, their specific brand of bad mood, the way their voice changed when they were hiding something. Long enough for Naomi's mother to ask careful questions, and for Naomi's best friend Dija to demand a full dossier on this Korean man before she gave any kind of blessing. Long enough for Hyun-woo to send flowers on her birthday, call her grandmother on her grandmother's birthday, and say, with that characteristic pause before the words, that he wanted her to come to Busan. Not as a tourist, as someone he was bringing home. My family, he said. I want you to meet them properly. Properly. That word carried a specific weight. Naomi understood what it meant because she'd been raised by women who understood what it meant. You didn't bring someone home to your family properly unless you intended to keep them. She booked the ticket, she told her mother. Her mother pressed her lips together in the way that meant she had concerns she was choosing not to voice, and then pulled Naomi into a hug that lasted slightly longer than necessary, and said, "You call me the moment you land." She told Dija, who immediately started a group chat called Naomi Goes to Korea, and populated it with a mixture of encouragement and highly specific anxieties. She spent 2 weeks researching Korean customs, appropriate gifts, and how to behave as a guest in a traditional family home. She watched videos. She practiced basic phrases. She brought the silk scarf, the leather journal, a small bottle of American bourbon she'd read might be appreciated, and a card she'd spent 3 evenings writing and rewriting until the Korean phrases Hyun-woo had helped her learn were laid out correctly. She had been precise. She had been careful. She had also, somewhere between the boarding gate in Atlanta and the moment she walked through the Lee family's front door, managed to be completely wrong about everything. Estate's Neen. The estate was larger than she'd expected. That should have registered as something the kind of family wealth that didn't announce itself but simply assumed you already knew. The house sat above the coastline, a sprawling structure of stone and glass that looked like it had been built to remind you of its permanence. Security at the gate, a housekeeper, a formal entryway with floors that reflected light. Naomi was noticed all of it, in the detached way you notice details when you're managing nerves, cataloging instead of processing. Keeping her breathing even. Adjusting the strap of her bag and reminding herself that she was good in rooms where she didn't belong on paper, but had earned her place through something else. Hyun-woo met her in the entryway. He hugged her briefly, stiffer than usual, and said she looked good. He said it the way you say something when you've rehearsed saying it. She noticed that too. She didn't say anything. She followed him into the main sitting room, carrying her thoughts carefully. The woman was sitting on a low sofa beside Hyun-woo's mother. Naomi's first thought was factual and stupid. She's wearing a nice dress. Cream-colored, understated, expensive. The woman was around her own age, maybe slightly younger, with the composed posture of someone who had been trained since childhood to occupy formal spaces without appearing to try. She had the ring on her left hand before Naomi consciously understood she was looking for it, and then her eyes found it, and everything in the room went very quiet. Not quiet in an external way. The room itself was normal. Hai-ran was lifting her teacup. Hyun-woo had moved to stand slightly to the left of Naomi in the specific physical position of a man preparing to not be between two things. Quiet was internal. The kind that happens when your mind refuses to run ahead of the available information, because the available information is already enough. Naomi looked at the ring. She looked at Hyun-woo. He was looking at the floor. Not at her. Not at the woman on the sofa, the floor. This, Hai-ran said, with the careful pleasantness of someone establishing fact rather than making conversation, is Kwon Ye-sul. She is the daughter of Chairman Kwon of the Kwon Industrial Group. She paused, setting her teacup down with a faint click against the saucer. She and Hyun-woo have been formally engaged for 3 weeks. The silk scarf was still in Naomi's bag. The card with the Korean phrases she'd spent 3 evenings writing. 3 weeks. She did the math. She and Hyun-woo had video called 6 days ago. He had asked about her flight. He had said he was looking forward to seeing her. He had been engaged for 3 weeks and called her 6 days ago to ask about her flight itinerary. Naomi turned to Hyun-woo. She didn't ask if it was true. She didn't ask for an explanation. She simply looked at him, waiting, because there was still a part of her that understood that she had traveled 14 hours and carried gifts and written a card, and she deserved at minimum the experience of watching his face while he found whatever he was going to say. He said nothing. He looked up from the floor, briefly, met her eyes, and then looked away again. His jaw was tight. His hands were at his sides. He was 33 years old, and he could not hold her gaze for 3 consecutive seconds. That was the moment. Not the ring. Not Hai-Ran's measured announcement. Hyun-woo's eyes sliding away from hers. Hai-Ran's voice continued, filling the space Hyun-woo refused to occupy. We appreciate that you've traveled a long distance. Arrangements can be made for you to stay in Busan before your return flight. However, I think it's important that you understand the situation clearly. She folded her hands in her lap. Her tone was not unkind in the way a blade isn't unkind. Our family has obligations, alliances. Hyun-woo's future requires a particular kind of partnership, and that partnership has now been decided. She looked at Naomi directly for the first time. I'm sure you understand. Naomi understood that she was being managed. She understood that this woman had done this before, had sat in this room and delivered uncomfortable information to inconvenient people with the serene confidence of someone who had never once been the inconvenient person in any room. She understood that Yusul hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, was sitting with the still patience of someone who also understood exactly what was happening and had chosen reasonably to simply wait it out. And she understood with the specific clarity that comes after the quiet that she was going to cry. Eventually, probably in about 4 to 6 hours when she was somewhere private, and that right now she was not going to give any single person in this room that particular gift. She picked up her suitcase. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. She just picked it up, the way you pick up a thing you came in with. She adjusted the handle. She looked at Hyun-woo one more time, not because she expected anything, but because she had known this person for 18 months, and some acknowledgement of that felt owed to herself, if not to him. He was still looking at the floor. Okay, she said. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just the word that meant she was done, waiting for something that wasn't coming. She turned toward the door. Don't leave. The voice came from behind her, from a direction she hadn't registered anyone standing, and it was low enough that it didn't need volume to fill the room. It was the kind of voice that was accustomed to not having to repeat itself. Naomi stopped, not because she was told to. She stopped because, in the space of everything that had just happened, a stranger's voice cutting through the room with those 2 specific words did something unexpected. It made the air pressure change. She felt every person in that room shift. She turned around. The man standing near the far doorway was not what she would have assembled from context. He was tall, broader in the shoulders than Hyun-woo, wearing a dark jacket over a shirt open at the collar, in the way of men who began the day formally and shed pieces of it as they moved. He looked at her, the way you look at a problem you've been told about in theory and are now encountering in practice with assessment, with something close to recognition, and with not a single trace of the careful social discomfort that had been coating every other face in the room since she arrived. He was 40-something. His face held the specific quality of someone who had spent years deciding things and had arrived at a point where deciding things no longer required any visible effort. He was looking directly at her, not past her, not through her, at her. And in that moment, in the wreckage of everything she had walked into, Naomi found that she was looking directly back. She had never heard Hyun-woo mention his brother by anything other than the most passing reference, the eldest son, the one who ran things, the one nobody talked about in much detail, and nobody seemed to discuss comfortably. She felt it. She had not asked too many questions because the discomfort around the subject had seemed like a boundary, and she had been respectful of other people's family boundaries. Standing in front of him now, with her suitcase in her hand and her chest so tight, it was hard to pull a full breath. She understood for the first time why no one discussed him comfortably. Tae-gyeom did not look like someone you discussed comfortably. He also notably did not look like someone who said things he didn't mean. He took 2 steps into the room, and the temperature of the room changed in the specific way it changes when authority enters a space that already has authority in it, and simply outweighs it. Hai-ran's posture shifted. Hyun-woo's shoulders dropped. Even Yi-sul's composed expression recalibrated slightly, the barest tightening around the eyes of someone reminding herself to hold still. Tae-gyeom looked at none of them. He was still looking at Naomi. "You don't have to leave," he said. Not a command this time. Statement. The difference was everything. Naomi had spent the last 10 minutes being managed. She recognized the opposite of that when it appeared. "I'm not staying somewhere I'm not wanted," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was the one grace the moment offered her. "You were wanted," he said, by someone who didn't have the spine to say so in front of his family. The room became extremely still. Hyun-woo finally looked up from the floor. His expression was the complicated expression of a younger brother who has just been reduced to a single accurate sentence by someone with the authority to reduce him. Hai-ran opened her mouth. Tae-gyeom turned his head toward her. Just his head. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. Hai-ran closed her mouth. Naomi watched this. She filed it. She was a woman who built strategies currently available, was stranger, and more layered than anything she had prepared for when she packed her careful, precise suitcase 14 hours ago. The eldest Lee's son looked back at her. "There's a guest suite on the second floor," he said. "Stay tonight. Leave tomorrow, if you want. But don't walk out of this house in the next 5 minutes like nothing you came for was real." Naomi's throat tightened, because that specific thing was the part she hadn't let herself feel yet. That the 18 months were real, that the gifts were real, that the card she'd spent 3 evenings writing was real, that she had been careful and precise, and it had not protected her from any of this, and someone she had met 60 seconds ago had just named more accurately than she could have named it herself. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She stood in the entryway of a house full of people who had arranged her humiliation with the smooth efficiency of people accustomed to arranging things, with her suitcase in her hand and her savings in her bank account, and 14 hours of flight time behind her. And Lee Tae-gyeom waited. He did not rush her. He did not soften the offer or repeat it or look away while she decided. He waited the way someone waits when they are certain they can wait longer than the situation requires. Naomi set the suitcase down. She did not look at Hyun-woo. She did not look at Hai-ran or at Yi-sul in her cream dress with her ring and her careful stillness. She looked at the man who had told his mother to be quiet with nothing but the angle of his head, and she made a decision that she already knew she would spend the next several days questioning. "One night," she said. Tae-gyeom nodded once, like a man receiving information he already had. And that was how Naomi Caldwell, who had flown to South Korea to meet the family of the man she loved, ended up staying in the house of his older brother instead. Naomi didn't sleep. She lay on top of the guest suite's bedding with her clothes still on and her phone balanced on her sternum and stared at a ceiling that probably cost more per square foot than her Atlanta apartment, and she ran the numbers. 18 months. 6 days ago. 3 weeks. She kept returning to those 3 points like a tongue returning to a broken tooth. The math was simple. The math was the problem. There was no version of the arithmetic that produced an innocent answer, and she was not a woman who could lie to herself effectively once the evidence was arranged in a row. Hyun-woo had known about the engagement before she booked her ticket. She thought about the specific quality of his voice during that last call. A sound like green wood splitting. The way he'd asked about her flight time, whether she'd arranged airport pickup, whether she'd remembered to pack warm layers because Busan in this season could be unpredictable. She had interpreted his attention as care. She understood now that it was something closer to guilt performing the shapes of care, which was its own particular kind of cruel, not the cruelty of indifference, but the cruelty of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and kept doing it anyway, because stopping required a courage they didn't have. Her phone screen lit up. "Dia." She declined the call. Then she opened the text thread and typed, "I'm fine." Story later. "Don't call Mom." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "Naomi Renee Caldwell, you better call me the second you are able to form sentences." She set the phone face down on the mattress. She thought about the guest suite. A sound like green wood splitting. She thought about the fact that she was lying in a room inside the house of a man she had met 1 hour ago, who had intervened in her humiliation with the casual authority of someone changing the channel, and who had not explained himself or his reasons. She had accepted his offer one night, she'd said, and meant it, and she was already aware that the decision had not been entirely rational. She told herself it was practical. Busan at night, no hotel booking, emotional wreckage, 14 hours of flight exhaustion. Practical. She also told herself that the alternative, walking out of that house while Hairan watched, had felt like giving the woman exactly what she wanted, which was Naomi's complete disappearance, and that Naomi Caldwell did not perform disappearance on anyone else's schedule. That part was probably more honest. She finally slept around 3 in the morning and woke up at 6 when the light coming through the curtains shifted from black to gray to the specific pale white of coastal morning. She washed her face, changed her clothes, and made herself look like a woman who had decided something rather than a woman who had survived something. Because those two things required different postures, and she had always understood the value of posture. She found Tae-gyeom in the kitchen. Not a formal dining room, the kitchen itself, standing at the counter with a coffee cup and what appeared to be a document he was reading without much pleasure. He was wearing different clothes than the night before. He had clearly already been up for some time. He looked up when she came in. He didn't look surprised. "There's coffee," he said. "I see it." She poured herself a cup and stood on the opposite side of the counter from him, because the counter felt like a reasonable neutral boundary, and she was a woman who established reasonable neutral boundaries. He went back to his document. She drank her coffee. Kitchen was quiet in the way of large houses that are staffed rather than lived in, clean and correct and slightly impersonal. After a moment she said, "Why did you stop me last night?" He set the document down. He looked at her with the same direct quality as the night before, not invasive, just present, like someone who considered looking at a thing to be a prerequisite for understanding it. "Because you were about to leave in the middle of something that wasn't finished." "It was very finished," she said. "The woman had a ring." "That wasn't what I meant." She waited. "Hyun-woo called me 4 months ago," Tae-gyeom said. "He told me about you. Not the first time he'd mentioned you before, but 4 months ago he called specifically to say that he was thinking seriously about bringing you here and that he wanted to know what I thought." Naomi's grip on the coffee cup didn't change. She kept her face arranged. "And what did you think?" "I thought he should do it if he meant it. A beat. I told him that if he was going to ask a woman to cross the Pacific for him, he had better be the man standing in the doorway when she arrived, not hiding behind his mother's furniture." The accuracy of this description, Hyun-woo had been essentially hiding behind the furniture, landed somewhere between funny and devastating. "He didn't tell me about the engagement," Tae-gyeom continued. "I found out 2 weeks ago from my mother. I told him then that what he was doing was wrong and that he needed to handle it before you arrived. He told me he would. He didn't." "No, he didn't." Naomi set her cup down on the counter. She looked at this man, this older brother she had never been told about in any real detail, who had apparently known about her existence for months, who had watched Hyun-woo make a series of cowardly decisions from close range and been unable to stop any of them, and who had nevertheless chosen last night to stop the one thing he actually had the standing to stop. "Why does that matter to you?" she asked. "I'm nobody to you. I'm a stranger your brother brought home and then humiliated. You could have stayed in whatever room you were in and let me walk out the door." Something moved in Tae-gyeom's expression. Not quite a reaction, more like the shadow of one, something he recognized and chose not to perform for her. "I've seen photographs of you," he said. "I've heard Hyun-woo talk about you for months. You were not abstract to me." He picked up his cup. "And what happened in that room last night was wrong. My family is capable of many things. I don't always agree with all of them. But I won't sit in another room while someone is treated like a mistake that needs to be quietly disposed of." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. "That's a very principled position for a man I've never met." "I'm aware. So what do you want from me?" He didn't hesitate. "Nothing." She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was the only answer that could have surprised her, and she had not expected to be surprised twice in 12 hours. People don't intervene in things for nothing, she said. People intervene in things because they can't stand not to. He held her gaze. That's not the same as wanting something in return. Kitchen held the weight of that for a moment. Then footsteps came down the hall, and Hyun-woo walked through the door. He saw Naomi first, then he saw Tae-gyeom, and the expression that crossed his face was the specific expression of a man who had woken up hoping a problem had resolved itself overnight, and was discovering that it had not. The silence in the room changed texture. Naomi, Hyun-woo said, "I was going to come find you this morning. Here I am," she said. He glanced at Tae-gyeom, then back at her. "Can we talk? Privately." "You had privately last night," she said. "You chose the floor." His jaw tightened. I know that. I'm asking you for—" "What, Hyun-woo?" Her voice was even, not loud. Even was worse than loud in her experience, because it didn't give anyone anything to push against. "What exactly are you asking me for?" He moved toward her, and she took one step back, not dramatic, not theatrical, just the automatic self-preservation of someone who needed the distance. He stopped. He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know how to tell you," he said. "My family started the arrangement, and I thought—" "You thought what?" "I thought maybe I could manage it." "Find a way to what?" Now there was something in her voice. Not volume. Heat. To manage an engagement and a relationship at the same time and see which one worked out? Was that the plan, Hyun-woo? Because that is the plan I am currently understanding. His face crumpled slightly at the edges, not tears, but the shape before tears, the shape of a man who was genuinely sorry and had also genuinely done the thing he was sorry for, which were not mutually exclusive, but were also not sufficient. "I love you," he said. "I need you to know that. I know you believe that." "True. I believe you believe it." She picked up her coffee cup again, something to do with her hands. "But Hyun-woo, you let me pack gifts for your parents. You let me write a card in Korean. You called me 6 days ago, 6 days, and asked about my flight, and you had been engaged for 3 weeks. She looked at him. "That's not love. That's cowardice, in a suit that looks like love." Tae-gyeom said nothing. He had moved slightly, angling himself out of the direct line between them, giving the conversation the physical space of something he was witnessing rather than participating in. But he hadn't left. Hyun-woo's eyes slid toward his brother with an expression that was 1 part grievance and 2 parts shame. "Did you talk to her last night?" he asked. "I offered her a room," Tae-gyeom said. "That's not what I asked." Then ask more precisely. "You had no right to offer a guest room?" Tae-gyeom's voice remained level, but there was something underneath the level, something dense and deliberate, like the current under still water. She was standing in the entryway of our family's house with a suitcase. "What would you have had me do? I would have had you stay out of it. And I would have had you handle your own affairs before they required someone else to manage the damage." He looked at his younger brother with the particular patience of someone who has had this version of this conversation before and is tired of it. "You didn't, so here we are." Hyun-woo turned back to Naomi. "Can we please just talk, just us?" Naomi considered. Not because she was uncertain. She had already decided that there was nothing Hyun-woo could say to her that would rewrite the arithmetic of the last 12 hours. She considered because she was a fair person, and fair people gave the necessary conversations their proper time, even when the outcome was already known. "Fine," she said, "but not here." Tae-gyeom stepped aside. To the sitting room, off the main entry, the same room where the engagement had been announced the previous evening, which felt appropriate in a grim way, the way it was appropriate to have difficult conversations in the place where the difficulty began. Hyun-woo closed the door. He turned to face her. "My mother arranged everything," he said. "I didn't have a choice." "You had every choice," Naomi said. "The choice to tell me, the choice to refuse, the choice to call me and say, 'Naomi, my family is doing something I can't control, and I don't know what to do.' Any of those choices. You had all of them. You don't understand what this family is like." "Then explain it to me." "You had 18 months. He was quiet for a moment. "Then my mother controls everything. The business, the alliances, the family decisions. She always has." He stopped. "Even Tae-gyeom what?" He shook his head. "It doesn't matter." "You brought him up?" I said it doesn't matter. His voice had an edge now, a different one than before, not shame, something sharper. I just need to know if there's anything left between us. Between us. She repeated the phrase without inflection. Yes. She looked at him. This man she had spent 18 months building an understanding of his silences, his humor, his particular thoughtfulness, the way he'd called at midnight to show her harbor fog. She looked at him, and she felt the loss of all of that, real and solid, like putting a hand on something that is no longer there. No, she said. There isn't. He nodded. He looked like he had expected it, and it hit him anyway. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm sorry. I know. She meant it. It didn't change anything. That was what sorrow cost. Sometimes it was real, and it was insufficient in the same breath, and she was not going to pretend otherwise for his comfort. She left him in the sitting room. In the hallway, she almost walked directly into Lee Hai-ran. The matriarch was coming from the direction of the dining room, dressed for the day with the same composed authority as the evening before, as though she had not spent the previous night arranging anyone's humiliation and had simply slept well and resumed operations. She looked at Naomi. She looked at the closed sitting room door. You're still here, she said. I am. Hai-ran tilted her head slightly. I spoke plainly last night. I was hoping it would prevent any unnecessary prolonging of this situation. It was very plain, Naomi agreed. It was also rude. Something shifted in Hai-ran's expression, brief, precise, like a card being noted and filed. I'm not interested in being rude, she said. I'm interested in protecting my family. From what? From me? From complications. That's a very clean word for a messy thing, Naomi said. Your son spent 18 months in a relationship with me. He didn't tell me about the engagement. That's not a complication I created. That's a complication your family created. My family's internal matters became my external reality. Naomi kept her voice precise. Not warm, not hostile, precise. I don't have anything against you personally, Mrs. Lee. You don't know me, and you made a decision about me based on what you saw when I walked through your door. I understand that. But what you saw was a woman your son invited here, and then failed to protect from exactly this situation. That's not on me. Hai-ran regarded her for a moment with the careful attention of someone recalibrating. You're very composed, she said, and it was unclear whether it was a compliment or a notation. I was raised that way. It won't help you here. I'm not trying to be helped, Naomi said. I'm trying to leave with my dignity. She moved past Hai-ran toward the staircase. Miss Caldwell. She stopped. Hai-ran's voice had not changed, but there was something underneath it now, something that hadn't been there the night before, not warmth, nothing as flexible as warmth. Something that was possibly respect, or possibly its cousin, which was the recognition of an adversary. Tae-gyeom has not shown interest in any person in several years, Hai-ran said. Not socially, not personally. He came home last night, and I heard him walk to the guest suite hallway before he went to his own room. She paused. I am telling you this because it is a fact, and because facts are more honest than warnings. Naomi turned around. Is that a warning? I told you what it was. You're telling me to leave before something else happens. Hai-ran said nothing, which was its own answer. Thank you for the room, Naomi said. And she went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the guest bed and stared at her suitcase and thought about Hai-ran's face in the hallway. She thought Tae-gyeom in the kitchen. She thought about Tae-gyeom in the kitchen, setting down his document, looking at her the way people looked at things they had already decided mattered. She thought about Yun-woo in the sitting room, nodding when she said no, because some part of him had already known. She pulled out her phone and booked a hotel in central Busan for 2 nights. Then she went downstairs to find Tae-gyeom. He was in what appeared to be a study books, a desk, a window overlooking the water. He was on the phone when she appeared in the doorway, and he ended the call with a brevity that suggested the call could wait rather than a deliberate choice to stop for her, which she appreciated for its honesty. I booked a hotel, she said. I'm leaving after lunch. He looked at her. Okay, I wanted to tell you directly. Not just leave. I appreciate that. She leaned against the doorframe. Not coming in, remaining on the threshold, which felt accurate to her position in this house. Your mother told me you walked past the guest suite hallway last night, she said. He didn't look away. He also didn't perform embarrassment, which she noted. I wanted to make sure you were still in the room, he said. You seem like someone who might change their mind about one night and leave at 2 in the morning. Was I wrong? No, you weren't wrong. She looked at him. Why did you really stop me last night? And I want the actual answer, not the principled one. He was quiet for a moment. The study held the silence without discomfort. Because I've heard about you for months, he said, and the person in that entryway was exactly who I expected you to be. And then my family did what they did, and you picked up your suitcase. And I thought, he stopped. Started again. I thought that it would be a waste. A waste of what? Of you, he said simply. Naomi stood in the doorway of this fan's study, in the house she had come to for entirely different reasons. With her hotel booked and her suitcase packed and her heart still bruised in the way that required time and privacy to process. And she felt something shift in the equation. She didn't like that it shifted. She especially didn't like how easily it shifted, which said something about her that she wasn't ready to examine honestly. I'll be gone after lunch, she repeated. I know. I'm not going to change my mind about that. I'm not asking you to. She nodded. She pushed off the doorframe.
Naomi.
His voice was quiet. Just her name. Not a demand, not a question. She looked back. Whatever Busan you've seen so far. He glanced briefly toward the window, toward the water. It's not the whole city. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she walked down the hall to finish packing, with his words following her. The way certain things followed you when you were trying to leave them behind, not chasing. Just keeping pace, patient as tide. Downstairs with her suitcase in the entryway, waiting for the car she'd arranged, when Yun-woo found her again. He looked worse than he had, in the kitchen, less rehearsed. The specific dishevelment of someone who had spent an hour sitting alone with their own decisions. He stood in the entryway and looked at her suitcase, and then at her face. You're going to a hotel, he said. Yes. Not home. Not yet. Something crossed his expression. Not hope, he was smarter than hope at this particular moment. More like unease. Naomi, don't, she said. I just want to know. Hyun-woo. She said his name the way you say the name of something you are setting down. We're finished. That's not going to change. Whatever you want to ask me, the answer that matters isn't going to come from me. She looked at him steadily. Go figure out what you actually want. Not what your mother decided. Not what keeps the alliance intact. What you want for yourself. That's the conversation you should be having. And I'm not the person you should be having it with. Swallowed. I don't know how to do that. I know, she said. That's been the problem for 18 months. The car arrived. She put her suitcase in the trunk herself, closed it, got in, and did not look back at the house as the car moved down the drive. She looked at the water, instead the harbor spreading wide and gray-green in the morning light, enormous and indifferent, and precisely what it was without apology. She was in the back seat, watching Busan open up around her, when her phone buzzed. An unknown number, local prefix. She stared at the screen for 3 full seconds and answered. There's a coastal trail, Tae-gyeom said, on the north end of the city. Most tourists don't find it. If you're going to stay 2 days, you should see something worth staying for. Naomi kept her eyes on the harbor. Her chest was doing something complicated. Her throat was tight. She had told herself she was leaving with her dignity and her plans, and nothing that belonged to anyone in that house, and she had meant it, and she still meant it. And she was also sitting in the back of a car, with her hand tightening slightly around a phone. I have things to do, she said. You have 2 days. I don't even know you. No, he said. But you know I stopped you at the door. And you know why. She said nothing. 10 o'clock tomorrow, he said. I'll be at the North Trailhead. If you come, I'll show you the city. If you don't, I'll assume you had better things to do. He hung up. Naomi lowered the phone from her ear. The car moved through the streets of Busan, and the harbor kept pace alongside her. And she stared at it and told herself that she was going to spend the evening in her hotel room, calling Dija and processing the last 24 hours and making sensible decisions about her remaining time in this country. She also told herself she was absolutely not going to show up at a trailhead at 10 o'clock for a man met less than 24 hours ago under the worst possible circumstances. She told herself that clearly and specifically, and with the conviction of someone who had been careful and precise her whole life, and who was standing at the precise edge of doing something that was neither. She arrived at the hotel, checked in, took a long shower, called Deja, and listened to 45 minutes of Deja's opinion on every aspect of every decision Naomi had made in the last 2 days. Then she set her alarm for 8:30 in the morning. She showed up at 9:58. She told herself it was because she had nothing else to do until her flight changed, which was partially true. She told herself it was because she was in a foreign city and a guided walk along a coastal trail was simply practical tourism, which was also partially true. She did not tell herself the third thing, the thing that had kept her awake past midnight, with Deja's voice still in her ear saying, "Naomi, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying pay attention to what you're actually doing." Because the third thing was not something she was ready to name at 9:58 in the morning on a trailhead in Busan with her sneakers and her sunglasses and her careful composure. Tae-gyeom was already there. No bodyguards, no suit. Dark jacket over a gray shirt, hands in his pockets, standing at the edge of where the path began its descent toward the water. He looked like someone who spent time outside regularly and didn't make a project of it. He saw her come around the corner, and something in his posture shifted not dramatically, just the small adjustment of a man who had genuinely not been certain she would appear. That small adjustment did something to her chest she immediately decided not to examine. "You came," he said. "You said 10 o'clock, she said. "I'm punctual." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. The potential of one. They walked. The trail was real, not polished, not signposted for tourists. A path that moved along the cliff edge above the water with the rough unpredictability of something shaped by foot traffic over years rather than by a parks authority. The sea below was deep green and agitated, moving with the kind of energy that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the rock formations it was constantly working against. The air smelled like salt and cold stone. Naomi hadn't brought enough jacket and was not going to mention it. Tae walked slightly ahead on the narrower sections and beside her on the wide ones, and he talked about the city the way people talked about places they had a complicated relationship with, not like a tour guide. Not like someone performing civic pride, but like someone who had been shaped by a place over decades and understood both what it gave and what it cost. He told her about the port. Not the shipping business, specifically the port itself, the way it had run in his grandfather's time. The particular economy of a harbor city, where every worker understood that what moved through the water happened, that what moved through every other part of life. He told her about the fish market at 4 in the morning, which he had visited exactly once as a child, and which his mother had considered wildly inappropriate for a Lee. A sound like green wood splitting. He told her about a hillside neighborhood where the houses were so close together that neighbors could hear each other's arguments through the walls, and where he had spent several evenings as a younger man, sitting in a friend's cramped kitchen eating food that was nothing like what he ate at home, and feeling, without quite being able to articulate it, more relaxed than he ever felt in the estate. Naomi listened. She asked questions, not the polite questions of someone performing interest, the actual questions of someone whose professional instinct was to understand how things worked, and why people became who they became. "What happened to that friend?" she asked, from the hillside neighborhood. A brief pause in his stride. "He works for me now." "Does that change things?" "Some things," he considered. "We still eat in his kitchen when there's an occasion. His wife makes the same food. But the dynamic is," he stopped, "different. Because you're the boss. Because everything is transactional now. Even when it isn't, it feels like it is." He looked at the water. "That's the thing about power that nobody explains to you. It doesn't just change how people treat you. It changes how you experience every room you're in, because you can't turn off the awareness of it." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to turn it off?" "Sometimes," he said. "Not often enough to give it up." She appreciated that he didn't pretend otherwise. They stopped at a place where the path widened into a flat overlook above the water. a natural shelf of rock, with a view down the coastline that went on until the land curved away and the sea absorbed the horizon. Was not, Naomi thought, the kind of place you found by accident. It was the kind of place you found because someone showed you. Hyunwoo never brought you to the city, Tae-gyeom said. It wasn't a question. We'd never been in the same city, she said. I was always going to come to Busan first. He talked about showing you around. He leaned against the rock at the overlook's edge. Talked about the fish market, the beach at Haeundae, the hillside neighborhoods. He had a list. He had a list, she repeated flatly. He's good at planning things, Tae-gyeom said, and there was something dry in it without being cruel. The execution has always been more complicated for him. He said your mother controls everything, that he didn't have a choice about the engagement. Tae-gyeom looked at the water for a moment. My mother has enormous influence. That's true. He paused. Hyunwoo has always allowed that influence more room than it needed because it's easier than the alternative. The alternative being disagreeing with her. The alternative being becoming someone who can disagree with her without the world ending. He turned his head slightly toward Naomi. My mother is powerful, and she's sharp, and she has spent 40 years building something substantial. She is also someone who will take precisely as much control as the people around her surrender. Hyunwoo surrenders a great deal, and his jaw moved. I took a long time to learn. Not to. They were quiet for a moment, the wind moving off the water with enough force to require a slight adjustment, both of them holding position on the rock shelf above the sea. She warned me about you, Naomi said. Your mother. In the hallway yesterday morning. What did she say? She told me you hadn't shown interest in anyone in years. She said she heard you walk past the guest suite hallway. She looked at him. She said she was telling me as a fact, not a warning. And you believed her. I believed it was both. He held her gaze. She's right that it's been years. She's not wrong about why she told you. He straightened from the rock. She's worried about things she can't arrange. Are you something she can't arrange? I was once, he said. Then I made myself impossible to arrange. It took time, and it was not a clean process. He began walking again, back toward the trail. But yes, what I do now is my own, she followed him. The rest of the walk covered 2 more hours and 3 more overlooks and a narrow section of path where the cliff dropped sharply enough that she put her hand briefly against the rock wall for balance, and his hand came to her elbow with the automatic steadiness of someone reacting before thinking, and they both noted it, and neither commented on it, which was its own kind of comment. They ate at a place he knew near the waterfront, a small restaurant with 6 tables and no English menu, where the owner greeted him with the familiarity of years, and the food arrived without ordering because apparently this was simply how it went. Naomi ate without knowing exactly what she was eating and found that she didn't care. The food was remarkable. She said so. You're not careful about eating things you don't recognize, he said. I'm a person who builds brands, she said. My whole job is figuring out what something is worth before it tells you. Food is the same. He looked at her across the table. Tell me about that. The brand strategy, she told him. Not the sanitized elevator pitch. She gave clients the actual thing. The way she had fallen into it, because her communication degree and her front desk job had put her in proximity to hospitality brands during a rebranding campaign, and she had understood instinctively that the problem wasn't the logo. It was the story the company was telling itself internally that then leaked out into everything. And she had said so in a meeting she technically hadn't been invited to. And the creative director had stared at her for 4 seconds and then asked who she was. Tae-gyeom listened the way he did. Everything with the focused, unperformative attention of someone for whom listening was a form of information gathering rather than a social obligation. You want your own agency, he said when she finished. One day. What's stopping you? She gave the practical answer: capital, client base, risk during a specific window of her career. He listened to the practical answer and then he said, What's the real answer? She looked at him. The real answer, she said carefully, is that I've spent my whole career being very good at telling other people what their story should be, and at some point I have to be willing to bet on my own. And you're not willing yet. I'm almost willing. She picked up her glass. In the process of becoming willing, something in his expression settled, the way an expression settled when someone heard something that confirmed a thing they already thought. The almost, he said, is where most people live their whole lives. I know. You're not most people. She looked at him steadily. You don't know that. I know you flew 14 hours to meet a man's family when he hadn't earned that, he said quietly. And I know that when everything in that house went wrong, you didn't beg and you didn't perform. You picked up your suitcase and you walked. He held her gaze. That's not almost. That's the person you already are, not the one you're still working toward. Naomi felt something move in her chest, real and inconvenient, and not small. She looked away first, looked at the window, at the street outside, at the particular afternoon light of a coastal city that had nothing to do with anything she'd come here for. I should head back, she said. Okay. He paid before she could address the question of paying, and she let it go because the fight wasn't worth having, and because something told her this was a man who would wait out any argument about a restaurant bill until the end of time. He walked her back toward the part of the waterfront where she could get a cab easily, and they stood at the edge of the street for a moment with the city moving around them. I haven't decided anything, she said, about any of this. I know, I'm still leaving in 2 days. I know that too. And she gestured vaguely, whatever you are, in this city, with your family. All of that is true, he said. None of it is a reason for today to have been what it was. She didn't have an answer for that because it was accurate, and she was tired of arguing with accurate things. Thank you for the trail, she said, and the food. He nodded. His eyes didn't leave her face. Naomi. Just her name. The way he'd said it on the phone, not a demand, not a question. A statement. The acknowledgement of a presence. She got in a cab before she could figure out what to do with it. The next morning, she woke up to 3 missed calls from Hyun-woo. She did not call back. She lay in the hotel bed in the pale morning light and looked at the missed call notifications and felt something that was not anger. Anger would have been simpler, but a kind of tired clarity. The feeling of a thing being definitively over, that had been partially over for much longer than she had allowed herself to know. Then her phone rang again. Not Hyun-woo's number. Unknown. Local, she answered. It was not Tae-gyeom. The voice was female, polished, speaking English with the careful precision of someone formally educated in it, rather than raised on it. She introduced herself in a way that was designed to establish context, without explanation. Kwon Yesul. Naomi sat up in bed. I'd like to speak with you, Yesul said. Privately, if you're willing. Every reasonable instinct said no. All right, Naomi said. They met at a cafe in a neighborhood Naomi didn't know, neutral ground chosen by Yesul, with the efficiency of someone who planned things and didn't feel the need to explain the planning. Yesul was there when Naomi arrived, already seated, already with tea, wearing something simple and expensive, her posture composed in the specific way it had been in the Lee family's sitting room, but without the ring. Naomi noticed that immediately. The left hand was bare. Thank you for coming, Yesil said. I almost didn't, Naomi said. Honesty seemed more efficient than pretense, given the context. I understand. Yesil cupped her tea with both hands. She was, up close and in neutral lighting, younger than she'd appeared in the estate's formal setting, mid-20s maybe, with eyes that were doing careful work, keeping whatever she was feeling from landing on her face. She was not entirely succeeding. I want you to know that I was not aware of you until 4 days before you arrived. Naomi looked at her. You're telling me this because I was also managed, Yesil said. My family and the Lee family arranged this without consulting me beyond the necessary formalities. I was told Hyun-woo was unattached. I was told the engagement was straightforward. She paused. I found out about you from my family's assistant, who found out from someone on the Lee family's staff. 4 days before you walked through that door. The cafe was quiet around them. Someone at another table was reading. The espresso machine behind the counter made its sounds. What did you do when you found out? Naomi asked. I told my father I wanted to cancel. Yesul's voice was steady. He told me I was being emotional and that the arrangement was important for business reasons and that these things were common and would resolve themselves. Resolve themselves, Naomi repeated. He meant you would leave and it would be over. Yusul set her cup down. He was not wrong that you would leave, that it would be simple. She looked at Naomi directly. I am also going to leave. I wanted you to know that, because I think you deserve to know that you were not the only person in that room who had been handled without their knowledge. Naomi sat with this information. She organized it. Why tell me? She asked. Because I watched you in that sitting room, Yisul said. And I watched what you did and how you stood, and I thought. She stopped, collected herself. I thought that if I had done that, walked away with that kind of self-possession, I might not be sitting here with no ring, telling a stranger about my family's decisions. She looked at the table. I'm ending the engagement this week. My father will be furious. I don't know what comes after that. She looked up. But I wanted to say something to the woman who showed me what walking away looked like before she left the country. Naomi felt the weight of it, genuine and strange and completely outside any version of this trip she had planned. You're braver than you're giving yourself credit for, she said. I'm terrified, Yesil said simply. That's what brave usually feels like. Yuls nodded once. Her eyes were shining, but not wet the disciplined near edge of someone who had decided which emotions they would allow to become visible. They sat together for another 20 minutes, talking about things that had nothing to do with the Lee family, and when Naomi walked back out into the Busan afternoon, she felt something she had not expected to feel during any part of this trip. The complicated, unexpected warmth of an encounter that had no agenda. She was walking back along the harbor when her phone rang. Tae-gyeom. Are you free tonight? He asked. Define free. There's somewhere I want to show you. A beat. It's not the kind of place I take people. I want you to understand that before you decide. Something in his voice was different, still contained, but shifted, the way a room's atmosphere shifted when a window was opened. I understand, she said. She should have asked more questions. That was the thing she would return to later, in a different version of this night, in the imaginary version where she was still careful. The show. She should have asked what kind of place, and why now, and what specifically he meant by the kind of place he didn't take people. She should have paid attention to the particular quality of the silence on his end of the phone before he spoke, the quality that she would later identify as a man deciding how much to show. She didn't ask. She said yes. He picked her up at 8. Car she hadn't seen before, darker, lower, the kind of car that was practical rather than status-oriented, which she noted because everything else about his life announced its status without apology. The driver was a man in his 40s who looked like he had been doing exactly this job for a very long time and had opinions about all of it that he was entirely not going to share. They drove for 30 minutes. The destination was a building near the port, not the polished commercial port of the shipping industry, but the older section, the working waterfront with its warehouses and chain link and the smell of salt mixed with diesel. The building looked like a converted warehouse from the outside, unremarkable, except for the specific quality of its unremarkability, the sense of a place that had been carefully made to appear unimportant. Inside was different. There were maybe 40 people in the room. Some were at tables. Some were moving between conversations with the efficiency of people who came here for specific purposes. There was a bar along one wall and 2 men standing near the back, whom Naomi clocked immediately as security. Not because they looked like film security, but because they were standing in the positions of people whose job was to observe. Tae-gyeom put his hand briefly at the small of her back as they entered. Brief, light, the touch of someone keeping track of where a person was, rather than claiming them. She registered it precisely. The room fell into the particular quiet that fell when a room recognized someone. Not silence, a recalibration. Conversations continued, but with the adjusted awareness of an apex predator entering a habitat where everyone understood what that meant. Naomi walked through it with her spine straight and her face level. At a corner table, Tae-gyeom sat across from a man in his 60s with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades near water and the eyes of someone who hadn't spent all of those decades doing legal business near it. The man's name was given only as Chairman Park. He greeted Tae-gyeom with a respect that had the specific texture of something earned through fear rather than affection. They spoke in Korean. Tae-gyeom translated occasionally, brief and clean the gist, not the full conversation. Naomi understood that this was being done deliberately, that she was being brought into proximus of something, rather than brought fully inside it. And she sat with that understanding and watched the room, rather than performing the discomfort she was in fact feeling. After 20 minutes, Chairman Park looked at her for the first time directly, with assessment. He said something in Korean. Tae-gyeom said, "He says you're not afraid." "I'm in an unfamiliar room full of unfamiliar people," Naomi said. "I'm paying attention. That's not the same as not being afraid." Tae-gyeom translated. Chairman Park looked at her for another moment, and then made a sound that was either approval or amusement, and possibly both. On the drive back, she sat beside Tae-gyeom in the back of the car and looked at the harbor lights, spreading across the water, and waited until the silence had been long enough to be honest. "That was your world," she said. "Part of it. You showed it to me on purpose." "Yes. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. The car moved along the waterfront road, the city lit and moving outside the window. "Because if I'm going to spend time with you honestly, you have to see honestly what you're spending time with." He turned his head toward her. "I am the CEO of a legitimate shipping company. I am also the man those people in that room answer to, for reasons that are not entirely legitimate. Both of those things are true. I don't perform the second one for most people, and I don't hide it for anyone I decide matters." The weight of that last sentence landed precisely where it was aimed. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she said. "I know." She stopped. Started again. "Tae-gyeom, I came here for your brother. I've been in this country for 3 days. I cannot." "I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight," he said. "I'm asking you to make it with accurate information." She looked at him, his face in the passing light of the harbor composed, direct, that particular quality of someone who had decided to show a thing and was now simply waiting for the honest response to it. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said, and that was the truest thing she had said in 3 days, possibly longer. "That makes 2 of us," he said, and there was something in it that was almost unguarded, almost, but not quite, and the almost was the most honest thing she had heard him say. She got back to her hotel at 11. She sat on the edge of the bed and held her phone and called Dija, who answered on the second ring, which meant Dija had been waiting. She told Dija everything. The lunch. Yesel. The warehouse by the port. Dija was quiet for 3 full seconds after she finished, which was extremely unlike Dija. "Naomi," Dija said, "I know. You know that this man runs—" "I know what he runs, and you—" "Dija, I'm not judging, a breath. Okay, I'm a little judging. I'm judging from a place of love and terror. Naomi, you flew there for his brother. I know that. And now you're in a car at 11 at night, coming back from a warehouse meeting with—" "I know," Naomi said. "I know all of it. I can see it from the outside as clearly as you can. Possibly more clearly, because I'm the one inside it." Pause. Then Dija quietly, "What are you going to do?" And Naomi, who had been careful and precise for 30 years, who had been raised by women who expected exactness, and had spent a decade building that expectation into a professional skill set and a personal philosophy, sat in a hotel room in Busan with the harbor outside her window and felt the precise and terrifying sensation of not knowing. She changed her flight. Not home. Not yet. 3 more days. She told herself it was because she wasn't finished processing what had happened with Hyunwoo, which was partially true. She told herself it was because Busan was worth more time than she'd given it, which was also partially true. She did not list the third reason in the internal accounting, but it was there, and it was the realest one, and it had the specific quality of a decision that could not be undecided. She texted Tae-gyeom, "Changed my flight. 3 more days." She set her phone on the nightstand face up, which was the honest posture, the posture of someone who intended to see the response when it came. It came in 4 minutes. "I know a place on the coast. Better than the trail. Bring a warmer jacket." She laughed. Once short into the quiet hotel room. The laugh surprised her not because it was inappropriate, but because it was real. And real laughter in the middle of the wreckage of the last 3 days felt like something she hadn't expected to recover quickly enough to have. She was still smiling when she put the phone down. She was still smiling when she heard the knock. A knock on her hotel room door at 11:40 at night. She hadn't ordered anything. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her chest tightened on pure instinct before she could manage it. She crossed to the door. She did not open it. Who is it? A voice she recognized. She opened the door. Hyun-woo stood in the hallway. He looked worse than he had yesterday. He looked like a man who had spent 2 days making bad decisions about how to spend his time, which was accurate. A sound like green wood splitting. He had a slight dishevelment that had nothing to do with the hour and everything to do with the state of someone who had been sitting with the consequences of their own choices. How did you know what hotel I was at? Naomi asked. My family's driver, he said. He picked you up. She made a note of that. You need to leave, Hyun-woo. 5 minutes, he said. Please. She looked at him in the doorway, this man she had loved for 18 months. Or the version of him she'd known. The version that existed in video calls and texts and 48-hour visits with the texture of something curated for her rather than real. She stepped aside. He came in. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the hotel room and looked at her with the expression of a man arriving at something he had been circling for 3 days. My mother told me you spent yesterday with Tae-gyeom, he said. That's accurate, she said. He stopped. His jaw worked. Naomi, my brother is not what he appears to be. He's been very clear about what he is. You don't understand. His voice had an urgency in it that she hadn't heard before, not hurt, not grief, something more jagged. You don't understand the kind of business he runs. The people he answers to. The things that happen because of him. He took a step toward her. You could get hurt. Naomi looked at him. She stood precisely where she was. Hyun-woo, she said, you drove to my hotel at midnight to warn me about your brother. I'm worried about you. You're worried about something, she said. I'm not sure it's me. Something crossed his face, quick and complicated, gone before she could map it. He's dangerous, Hyun-woo said. I know. Then why? Because he's honest, she said. He showed me the dangerous parts himself and let me decide what to do with the information. That is more than you gave me in 18 months. She held his gaze. Leave, Hyun-woo. Naomi, I'm not angry at you. I'm also not confused about you. Those are two different things, and you're treating them like they're the same. She walked to the door and opened it. Good night. He stood in the middle of the room for 3 more seconds. Then he walked past her and into the hallway, and she closed the door before he turned around. She stood with her back against the door. She stood there for a long time. Then her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from a number she didn't have saved. She crossed the room. She picked it up. The text read, Miss Caldwell. This is Han Sung-jun. I am the chief legal counsel for the Lee family. I need to speak with you urgently about a matter involving Lee Tae-gyeom. What you know about his operations could place you in significant legal and physical danger. Please do not discuss this message with him. I can meet you tomorrow at any location you choose. Naomi read the message 3 times. Then she put the phone face down on the nightstand, sat on the edge of the bed, and felt the specific sensation of a room tilting, not dramatically, not like a movie. Just the subtle wrongness of a floor that had been reliable an hour ago and now communicated, through some quality of its stillness, that the ground beneath it had shifted. Someone inside the Lee organization had just made contact with her, secretly, to warn her about Tae-gyeom. And the only people who had known she changed her flight were Tae-gyeom and the hotel's front desk. She sat with that in the dark for a long time, and when she finally lay back on the bed, she did not sleep. A sound like green wood splitting, and the harbor outside her window moved in the dark with the indifferent patience of deep water that had been there long before any of this, and would be there long after. Sup scene, and somewhere in the city the man who had shown her his world in honesty was either the thing she had begun to trust or the thing she should have feared from the beginning. She didn't sleep, and she didn't pretend to. She sat up at 4 a.m. with the phone in her hand and the text from Han Sung-jun still on the screen, and she read it again the way you read something when you're hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something less alarming. They didn't. The words stayed exactly where they were, precise and weighted, carrying the specific gravity of information delivered by someone who had calculated the risk of delivering it. She thought about what she knew in the order she knew it. Han Sung-jun was the Lee family's chief legal counsel. He had access to information about Tae-gyeom's operations. He had contacted her on a number she hadn't given him, which meant he'd obtained it through channels she hadn't consent to. He had told her not to discuss the message with Tae-gyeom. And the only people who had known she changed her flight were Tae-gyeom and the hotel front desk, which meant either the front desk had a leak or someone close to Tae-gyeom was watching her movements closely enough to pass the number to the family's legal counsel within hours of her decision. None of these facts assembled into a picture she liked. She also thought about Hyunwoo in her doorway. My brother is not what he appears to be. She had dismissed it as jealousy, performing the costume of concern. She was still mostly certain that was what it was. But mostly certain and completely certain were different things, and she had been completely certain about other things recently that had not held up. At 5:30 she got up, showered, dressed, and sat at the small desk by the window with a cup of hotel coffee and her laptop open. She did what she did when she needed to understand something. She built a framework. She opened a document and typed out everything she knew in columns: facts, interpretations, open questions. She had done this for clients in crisis situations. She had never done it for herself, in a foreign country, in the middle of something she did not have a professional category for. The open questions column was the longest. At 7:15, she texted Han Sung-jun, "I'll meet you." Name the place. He responded in 4 minutes with a cafe address in a neighborhood that her phone's map told her was in the western part of the city, away from the waterfront. Neutral, anonymous. 10 o'clock. She had 2 hours and 45 minutes. She used them to think about Tae-gyeom, not the emotional version of thinking about him, which she could feel pressing at the edges of her reasoning like weather at a window, but the analytical version. She thought about what he had shown her and what he had told her, and the specific sequencing of both. He had told her about his world before showing it to her. He had shown her the warehouse not as a display of power, but as a disclosure: here is the thing. Now you decide. She had been in enough rooms with enough people who wanted something from her to know the difference between a man building a trap and a man opening a door. She thought she knew the difference. She had also thought she knew Hyunwoo. She walked to the cafe. Han Sung-jun was in his 50s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had the groomed precision of a man, presumed of a man whose professional existence depended on appearing unruffled. And he was achieving that appearance with moderate success except for his hands, which were wrapped too tightly around his coffee cup. She noticed the hands immediately. She sat down across from him without greeting. "Talk," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the assessing quality of someone recalibrating toward directness. Good. She didn't have time for the alternative. "How much do you know about Lee Tae-gyeom's operations?" he asked. "Enough to have a conversation," she said. "Not enough to be dangerous to anyone." "Specifically are you concerned about?" He leaned forward slightly. 3 months ago, a joint investigation was opened between Korean federal authorities and an American financial crimes unit. The investigation involves port-based money movement across several Pacific trade corridors. He paused. Tae-gyeom is the primary subject. Naomi kept her face arranged. "That's his legal exposure. Why are you telling me?" "Because you are currently in voluntary proximity to the primary subject of a federal investigation," Shin Sung-jun said. "And because there are people within his organization, not the authorities, but people within his own network who have become aware of that investigation and are making decisions based on it." He looked at her steadily. "Miss Caldwell, when a man at Tae-gyeom's level becomes the subject of that kind of investigation, the people around him don't wait for the legal process. They move first to protect assets, to eliminate exposure. A beat. You are currently an unknown variable in a situation where unknown variables get managed." The word "managed" landed in the specific way it had when Hiran used it about Naomi's presence in the family's life. She noted that. "Who sent you?" she asked. Something shifted behind his eyes. "The family has interests. I didn't ask about interests. I asked who sent you." He straightened in his chair. "Lee Hiran is aware of this meeting. There it was." Naomi Sim sat back in her chair. She looked at the man across the table, this lawyer, in his very expensive suit, with his too tight hands and his carefully constructed presentation of concern. She looked at him the way she looked at a brand story that didn't match the product underneath it. "Let me ask you something," she said. "Is there actually a federal investigation?" Pause. "Yes. And is Tae-gyeom actually the primary subject?" Another pause, shorter. "He is under investigation." "The scope, is he the primary subject?" Han Sung-jun's jaw tightened. "He is a significant subject." "That's a different word than primary," she said. "Try again." The lawyer looked at her with the expression of a man who had underestimated the specific kind of intelligence sitting across from him. "The investigation involves multiple parties," he said carefully. "Tae-gyeom is among them, and Hairan sent you here to tell me that her son is under federal investigation as a way of convincing me to leave the country." He said nothing, which was its own answer. "Here's what I think," Naomi said. She kept her voice even, not cold, not warm, precise. "I think there is an investigation. I think it may or may not involve Tae-gyeom as seriously as you've suggested. I think Hairan is watching her son develop an interest in a woman she did not select, in a situation she did not control, and she is deploying her legal counsel to add a layer of danger to the existing social pressure to make me leave." She looked at him. "How close am I?" The lawyer set down his coffee cup. He looked at the table for a moment. "The investigation is real," he said, and this time his voice had a different quality, quieter, less constructed. "The danger within his network is also real, and it is not a fabrication to serve Hairan's social preferences. Both things are true simultaneously." He looked at her. "Miss Caldwell, I have worked for this family for 22 years. I am telling you as plainly as I can, separate from whatever Hairan's motivations are, that the situation around Tae-gyeom right now is genuinely unstable. You should not be here." She looked at him for a long moment. She believed him. Not the framing. The framing was compromised by Hairan's fingerprints all over it. But the core, the thing underneath the deployment of concern, that was real. She could hear it in the change his voice made when he separated himself from the family's agenda. Stood up. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "Miss Caldwell, I heard you," she said. "I heard everything you said." She left him at the table. She walked out into the Busan morning, with the traffic moving around her and the harbor visible at the end of the street in the specific weight of new information, pressing against every decision she had made in the last 4 days. She walked for 20 minutes without direction, just moving, because movement was the only thing that kept her thinking from becoming circular. Then she called Tae-gyeom. He answered on the second ring. "Naomi, I need to see you," she said. "Not at the estate. Somewhere neutral. A beat. What happened? I'll tell you when I see you." Another beat. Longer. She could feel him reading the quality of her voice, the way he read everything with attention, without rushing. "Cafe near Gamcheon," he said. "I'll send you the address." She got there before him. She sat at a table near the back and ordered water and waited, and she thought about what she was doing and why, and she thought about Deeja's voice on the phone saying, "You flew there for his brother." And she thought about her grandmother's voice saying, "Precise is for people who respect themselves." And she thought about the open questions column in the document on her laptop and the fact that the most important open question was not about investigations or networks or Hairan's agenda. It was about whether what she was feeling was real enough to survive honest information. Tae-gyeom walked in and she could see immediately that he already knew something had happened. Not the specifics, but his face had the quality of a man who had been moving through his morning with one ear tilted toward a frequency he couldn't fully hear yet. He sat down across from her. He looked at her face. "Tell me," said. She told him. All of it, Han Sung-jun, the text, the meeting, what the lawyer had said, and what she had read between the lines of what he said. She told it in order without editorializing, the way she would present a situation analysis to a client. She watched Tae-gyeom's face while she spoke. What she watched was extremely controlled and not entirely controlled. She watched his jaw set at the mention of Han Sung-jun. She watched something pass through his eyes, not surprise, something more layered, something that looked like a man confirming a suspicion he had hoped was wrong. She watched his hands on the table perfectly still, in the way that hands were still when someone was actively preventing them from reacting. When she finished, the silence lasted 5 full seconds. "My mother sent him," he said. "Yes. She obtained your number through the hotel. That's my best guess. She contacted you privately instead of confronting me directly because she knew a direct confrontation with me would—" He stopped. He picked up his water glass, set it down without drinking. "She's not wrong that there's an investigation," he said. Naomi held steady. "I know. She is wrong about the severity of my exposure. I have counsel. I have been managing this situation for 8 months. I am not the primary subject a former associate is, and there is an effort to trace connections outward from him, some of which reach me. My legal team has been addressing those connection points." He looked at her. "I did not tell you this because it's an ongoing legal matter and because I did not want to perform my problems for you before you had reason to be invested in them." "Are you invested in me?" she asked. He looked at her. "That's not a real question." "It is, Naomi." He said her name the same way he always said it, like a statement. "I showed you the warehouse because I wanted to be honest with you. I have not shown anyone that room in 4 years." He held her gaze. "You are not a variable in a calculation. You are not a complication I'm managing. You are the specific person I have been trying to see clearly since you walked into my family's house with a suitcase full of gifts for people who didn't deserve them." Her throat tightened. "Your mother is trying to get rid of me," she said. "Yes. And the investigation is real. Yes. And there are people in your network who know about it and are moving around it." He was quiet for a beat. "Yes. And I'm sitting here in a cafe in Busan having this conversation instead of being on a plane home." She looked at him. "What does that tell you?" Something in his expression shifted, not the controlled version, the real version, the one that looked like a man arriving at the edge of something he had been moving toward and not permitting himself to reach. "It tells me," he said carefully, "that you are doing something you haven't fully decided yet." I've decided," she said. She stopped. "I haven't said it out loud." He waited. She looked at Tae-gyeom across the table, this complicated, controlled, dangerous man who ran things she didn't approve of and understood things about power that made her uneasy, who had shown her the parts of himself he didn't show people and waited for her honest response to them, who had stopped her in a doorway with 2 words and meant exactly both of them. "I'm not leaving," she said. Something in his face opened. Not dramatically. This was not a man who did things dramatically. But something that had been held in reserve behind the control, behind the management of expression and reaction, came briefly to the surface. It was the look of someone who had expected to be left and was encountering the opposite and did not quite know in the instant of encountering it what to do with his own response. He reached across the table. His hand covered hers. "Okay," he said. "Just that, okay." She turned her hand over under his and held on. They stayed in the cafe for another hour. They talked not about investigations, not about Hiran, not about any of the machinery surrounding them. Sace about Atlanta and Busan and the specific texture of building something when you come from people who didn't have the thing you're building. She told him about her grandmother's hands, always moving, always making something. He told her about her grandfather in the port at dawn, before the family had money, pulling lines with the workers because he didn't believe in supervising a thing you weren't willing to do yourself. She told him that she had a draft business plan for her own agency that she'd never shown another human being. Splitting. He told her that the hillside neighborhood where his friend's kitchen was had a small commercial space that had been empty for 2 years because the right tenant hadn't appeared. She laughed. He watched her laugh with the particular attention of someone storing something. They walked out of the cafe and into a Busan afternoon that was cold and salt-bright and enormous. He took her hand on the street. Not performing it, just taking it, the way you took hold of something you intended to keep. She let him. That was the afternoon. That was the good part. That was the last uninterrupted hour, before everything that had been moving underground broke the surface. The call came at 4:57, Tae-gyeom's phone. He looked at the screen, and his face went through 3 things in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, and a decision, and then he answered and spoke in Korean for 90 seconds, while his hand that was holding hers stayed exactly where it was, and when he hung up, his jaw was set in a way she hadn't seen before, not controlled but compressed. The look of someone absorbing something they had known was coming and are now receiving earlier than planned. "What happened?" she asked. "The board meeting my mother has been arranging," he said. She moved it up. "It's tomorrow morning." He looked at Naomi. "She's calling a vote on my position as heir." Naomi stared at him. "Can she do that?" "She controls enough of the family's senior advisors to call the meeting. Whether she controls enough to carry the vote is another question." He was already moving, not panicking, moving, the specific directed motion of someone switching from one mode of operation to another. "She's been planning this. Sung-jun's meeting with you this morning was part of it. She was trying to get you up the picture before the board meeting, so she could argue I was making decisions compromised by personal entanglements. She wants to remove you. She wants to remind me who holds the structure," he said. "She thinks a vote threat will pull me back into compliance." He looked at Naomi. Something moved in his face. "She's miscalculated." "How?" "Because she's assuming what I want is to keep the position," he said. "She's been assuming that since I was 25. She is not current on what I actually want." The weight of that statement fell between them, and she felt it land, and she didn't look away from it. "Tae-gyeom," she said, "if you walk into that board meeting with me, I know what happens, do you?" "Yes." He looked at her with that direct, comprehensive attention. "I lose the position or I don't. Either way, something changes. Either way, my mother understands that I am not going to be managed through the people I care about." He paused. "That understanding needs to happen. It should have happened years ago." "This is a lot to put on 4 days," she said. And she meant it not as a retreat, not as a door closing, but as honesty, because he had been honest with her, and she owed him the same. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to make a decision about 4 days. I'm telling you what I'm going to do, and I'm being transparent about it, because that's what we've been doing." He looked at her. "What you do is yours." She stood on the Busan street with her hand still in his and felt the specific vertigo of a situation where every available option required something she had not planned to give. She had not planned to be in this country past 2 days. She had not planned to be standing here with this man. She had not planned for any of the last 5 days, and she was not sure that planning would have helped. "When is the meeting?" she asked. 10 o'clock tomorrow." "Where?" He looked at her. Something shifted. "Lee Group's main boardroom. Tower on the harbor." "I want to be there," she said. He stared at her. "Not inside the room," she said. "I'm not going to walk into your family's board meeting like a statement. That's yours. But I want to be in the building." She met his eyes. "I want you to know I'm there." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Why?" "Because you came to a doorway for me," she said. "This is a doorway." Something moved in his face that she didn't have a name for. Something that was behind the control and beneath the careful management of self that he carried like a tech Sexington. Something raw and real that lasted only a moment before he pulled it back. Not out of concealment, but out of the habit of a man who had not known for a very long time what to do with some seeing him clearly. "Okay," he said. Just that again. "Okay." The most loaded simple word in his vocabulary. They walked back toward the harbor. At 9 that evening, she was in her hotel room when the knock came. Not Yunwoo this time. She checked the peephole. 2 men she didn't know, in suits, with the specific bearing of men whose suits were functional rather than formal. She did not open the door. "Miss Caldwell." A voice through the door, calm, Korean-accented English. "We'd like to speak with you about Lee Tae-gyeom." Her heart moved. She kept her breathing even. "Who are you?" she asked through the door. "We're with the Ministry of Justice Financial Crimes Division." A pause. "We've been informed you have close contact with the subject. We'd like to ask you a few questions." She stood with her back against the wall beside the door and felt her pulse in her palms and thought very clearly and very fast. Investigators showing up at a hotel room at 9 at night was not standard procedure for anything legitimate. Standard procedure involved subpoenas and formal interview requests and lawyers and daylight. Someone had sent them. She thought about Han Sung-jun's meeting. She thought about the family's reach in this city. She thought about the word managed. "I'd like to contact my country's consulate before I speak with anyone," she said through the door. Her voice stayed level. She was proud of it staying level. Pause. "That's your right. Then I'll be in touch tomorrow." Another pause. "Miss Caldwell, it would be in your interest to cooperate voluntarily." "I am cooperating," she said. "I'm being precise about my rights while doing it. Good night." She heard them in the hall for 30 more seconds. Then footsteps moving away. She called Tae-gyeom. He answered in 2 rings. She told him. He was quiet for 4 seconds. "Pack a bag," he said. "The essentials. Leave the rest." "Those were not government investigators," he said. And his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before. Not panic, nothing approaching panic, but a density that told her he was operating from a different protocol than the one he used for conversations. "The ministry does not conduct hotel visits at 9 in the evening. That was a pressure tactic from someone inside my network who knows about the investigation and is trying to destabilize the situation before tomorrow." He paused. "I should have seen this coming sooner. I underestimated the timeline." "Who?" "I'll explain when you're out of that hotel." His voice was controlled and fast. "Pack. My man will be outside in 15 minutes. Dark gray car. The driver's name is Cho. He'll know your name. Where are we going?" "Somewhere my mother doesn't own," he said, "and somewhere the people moving around my network don't have access to." She stood in the middle of her hotel room. She looked at her suitcase. She thought about the document on her laptop with its 3 columns: facts, interpretations, open questions, and she thought about how many of the open questions had been answered in the last 12 hours and how many of the answers had produced new questions. She packed. 8 minutes. She was faster than she expected. Her hands were steady, and she found that interesting about herself, that under this specific kind of pressure, her hands were steady, and she filed it and moved. The car was outside at the 14-minute mark. The driver said her name before she said anything. She got in. They drove for 20 minutes through parts of Busan she hadn't seen, away from the waterfront, into a residential district that moved from commercial density to something quieter, the specific quiet of a neighborhood that had money but didn't advertise it. Car stopped outside a building, not large 3 floors, stone facade, the kind of building that looked private because it was. Tae-gyeom was waiting outside. He looked different than he had that afternoon. Not disheveled, he was incapable of disheveled. She suspected, but stripped of the social layer, the version of him that existed in restaurants and coastal walks. This was the version underneath. Alert, calibrated to a frequency she hadn't seen operating at full power. He looked at her face when she got out of the car. He looked at her bag. "You're all right," he said. "I'm fine." She looked at him. "Who sent them?" He held the building door open. "Come inside." The building's interior was clean and sparse, and clearly not a home, a private space, a place maintained for functional purposes. There was a table, several chairs, a kitchen that looked like it was used occasionally rather than lived in. No photographs, no personal artifacts. A man was already there. Late 40s, thick through the shoulders, with eyes that moved around the room on a pattern and then settled. He stood when they entered. "This is Min Jae-won," Tae-gyeom said. "He runs my security operations. He's been my closest advisor for 12 years. Min Jae-won looked at Naomi with an expression she couldn't fully read: assessment, something that might have been approval, and underneath both, something guarded. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "I apologize for the circumstances." "Tell me what's happening," she said. Not to Min, to Tae-gyeom. Tae-gyeom pulled out a chair at the table and sat. He ran a hand through his hair, the first genuinely unguarded physical gesture she had seen him make, the gesture of a man who was thinking past the performance of composure. "Someone's inside my inner circle," he said, "has been feeding information to both the investigation and to my mother's board preparation. Details about my schedule, my contacts, my current legal exposure information that should not be outside a circle of 5 people." He looked at the table. "The hotel visit tonight was designed to frighten you into leaving the country, which would remove a personal variable from my situation before the board meeting, and also, potentially, Compromise my judgment before tomorrow morning if I was focused on your safety rather than the meeting. It's working, she said flatly, on the focusing your attention part. I know. He looked at her. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Tell me who. He looked at Min Jae-won. Min Jae-won looked at Naomi. He looked at Tae-gyeom. We have reason to believe, Min said carefully, that the source is someone with access to both the family's internal board discussions and Tae-gyeom's operational schedule. He paused. The overlap of those two access points is very small. Naomi thought about it. The family's legal counsel has access to board discussions. Yes, Min said. And Han Sung-jun met with me this morning on Hai-ran's behalf. Yes, but you said he had operational access too. She looked at Tae-gyeom. How much access did your mother's lawyer have to your operations? Tae-gyeom's expression went through something. He handles some of the cross-entity legal work. There's interface between the legitimate business and the… He stopped. Enough. He had enough access. So Han Sung-jun is feeding information both ways, Naomi said. To the investigation and to your mother's board preparation. And your mother either knows and is using it, or she doesn't know. And he's running his own agenda. Tae-gyeom looked at her. You got there faster than we did, Min said quietly. I build frameworks for a living, she said. The variables aren't that different. Something in Tae-gyeom's expression, that thing she'd seen in the cafe, the thing that came from behind the control briefly and retreated and appeared again and stayed slightly longer this time. There's more, Min said. She looked at him. Han Sung-jun has been in contact with Chairman Park, he said. The man you met at the warehouse. The room went very still. Naomi thought about Chairman Park's weathered face. The respect in that room that was made of fear rather than affection. The way Tae-gyeom had translated selectively, offering her the gist rather than the full conversation. What kind of contact, she asked. Min looked at Tae-gyeom. Tell her, Tae-gyeom said. Chairman Park has been approached with a proposal, Min said. If Tae-gyeom's position destabilizes, if he loses the board vote, if the investigation creates legal vulnerability, if his network loses confidence in him, Park has been offered the operational territories in exchange for stepping back from the alliance with Tae-gyeom. He paused. The offer came from someone within the Lee family's legal structure. Naomi sat with this. Han Sung-jun has been working to dismantle Tae-gyeom from 3 directions simultaneously, she said. The investigation feeding, the board preparation for Hai-ran, and a backup offer to Park in case the first 2 don't complete the job. Yes, Min said. She looked at Tae-gyeom. He was looking at the table with the expression of a man from processing a betrayal that had come from close range and had been in motion long enough that the damage was already done. 12 years. He'd said Min Jae-won was his advisor for 12 years. Han Sung-jun had been the family's lawyer for 22. Does he know you know? She asked. As of tonight, Tae-gyeom said, he knows we've identified the source. He doesn't know the extent. He looked up. He'll move quickly now. He won't wait for the board meeting to resolve. What does moving quickly look like? Question sat in the air. Min looked at Tae-gyeom. Tae-gyeom looked at Naomi. It looks like what happened tonight at your hotel, he said. Accelerated, with less subtlety. The implications of that assembled themselves in her mind with a precision she didn't want. I need to call the American consulate, she said. Yes, he said immediately. That's the right call. I've already had my legal team contact them. They're expecting to hear from you tomorrow morning. You contacted the consulate for me before I asked. I contacted them 40 minutes ago, he said, when Min told me about the hotel visit. She looked at this man, this complicated, powerful, dangerous man who had, in the last hour, told her to pack a bag, gotten her out of a hotel, identified the traitor in his own circle, and contacted her country's consulate without being asked, because the immediate protection of the person he cared about was a higher priority than any of the operational chaos descending on his life from 3 directions. Her chest ached with something she wasn't going to name at 11:30 at night in a safe house with an active threat in motion. But she felt it. The board meeting is still at 10 tomorrow, she said. Yes, and you're still going. Yes. And Han Sung-jun will be there. Tae-gyeom looked at her. He won't be expecting me to know what I know. That's the advantage. The only one at this point. She thought about the boardroom on the harbor. She thought about Hiran at her table, with her teacup, managing outcomes. She thought about a man who had spent 22 years inside a family's legal structure, patient and entrusted, and waiting for the right configuration of crisis to make his move. She thought about doorways. I want to be in that building, she said. What I said this afternoon. I still mean it. Tae-gyeom looked at her for a long time. Min will arrange a space on the floor below the boardroom, he said. You'll have eyes on the building's entrance. You'll be connected to my phone. And if something goes wrong in that room? I've been managing that boardroom for 15 years, he said. Nothing will go wrong that I can't handle. That's not an answer to my question. His jaw set. If something goes wrong that I can't handle, he said, Min will get you out of the building immediately. No discussion. You go. She looked at him. She said. Min Jae-won excused himself to make calls, leaving them alone in the spare, functional room. Tae-gyeom sat at the table with his hands flat on its surface, looking at the middle distance with the particular focus of a man running variables. She sat across from him. How are you? She asked. He looked at her. The question had clearly not been what he expected. I've had worse nights. That's not what I asked. He held her gaze. Something in his face shifted the slow, specific movement of a man, remembering that honesty had been the agreement they made. 22 years, he said. I trusted that man, with things I don't trust most people with. He looked at his hands on the table. That's not a failure of intelligence. It's a failure of he stopped. Of what? Of wanting to believe that proximity means something, he said quietly. That the people close to you are close to you because of something real. He looked up at her. It's a thing you learn repeatedly, and it doesn't get easier. Naomi thought about 18 months of video calls and a man who asked about her flight from the bed of a secret engagement. No, she said. It doesn't. They looked at each other across the table in the quiet of the safe house. Two people who had arrived at the same lesson from completely different directions. And for a moment, the machinery of investigation and board meetings and network betrayal fell back, and there was only the room, and the table, and the specific, inconvenient, entirely real thing that had been building between them since a doorway in a different house 5 days ago. He reached across the table, not for her hand this time. He placed his palm flat on the table between them, an offering rather than a grasp, and she placed her hand over his, and they stayed like that in the silence while outside, the city moved toward morning, and the boardroom on the harbor waited with all of its machinery intact, and somewhere in that same city a man who had spent 22 years building a betrayal was making his final calculations. Unaware that the most important variable he had failed to account for was sitting in a safe house with her hand over a dangerous man's and her jaw set. Clock on the wall read 11:58. In 10 hours and 2 minutes, the door to the Lee Group boardroom would open, and Lee Tae-gyeom would walk through it. And everything that had been moved in the dark for months would finally have to be decided in the light. Naomi looked at their hands on the table. She thought, I am so far from Atlanta. She thought, I have never been more precisely where I am. She didn't sleep at the safe house either. Tae-gyeom had arranged a room for her small, clean, a bed and a window, and nothing she needed to be comfortable beyond those two things. And she had lain down at 1 a.m. with her shoes off and her jacket folded over the chair. And she had stared at the ceiling with the focused, unproductive attention of a mind that refused to stop processing. She ran the board meeting in her head. She ran Han Sung-jun's face across the table at the cafe, the hands too tight on the coffee cup, the moment when his voice changed and became something other than Hiran's instrument. She ran the hotel hallway, the knock, the specific quality of not opening the door and knowing she was right not to. She thought about Tae-gyeom at the table, with his palm flat the offering of it. She got up at 5:15, washed her face, and found Min Jae-won already in the main room with coffee and a laptop, and the specific alertness of a man who had not slept at all. He looked up when she appeared. He's been up since 4, Min said, answering the question she hadn't asked. Where is he? Min nodded toward a closed door at the end of the hall. She knocked twice quietly. Tae-gyeom's voice. Come in. He was sitting at a desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled, with documents spread in a pattern that had an organizing logic she couldn't immediately read. He looked up. He looked like a man who had been working for several hours and was not performing any version of being fine about it. You should have slept, he said. So should you. He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned back to the documents. Come look at this. She came around the desk. The documents were financial, not the kind she worked with, but she understood structure, and the structure she was looking at had been annotated in his handwriting in the margins, dense and fast, cross-referenced with arrows. These are the independent holdings, he said. Companies I've built outside the Lee family's corporate structure over the last 8 years. Quietly, without involving the family's legal counsel, he tapped a page. Han Sung-jun knows about the operational network. He does not know about these. He looked at her. Whatever he thinks he's dismantling, this isn't in the picture he has. You built an exit, she said. I built insurance, he said. The exit was never the intention. But yes, if the board votes to remove me, I don't lose everything. I lose the name and the inherited position. What I've built is mine. She looked at the documents. She thought about the version of Tae-gyeom she had been assembling over 5 days, not the version the family presented, not the version the network made inevitable, but the actual man, the one who had been quietly and patiently constructing the conditions under which he could afford to be honest. You've been planning for years to be able to choose, she said. He paused. I've been planning for years to make sure the choice was real. He looked at the papers. A choice you can't afford to make isn't a choice. She stood beside him at the desk in the early morning quiet and felt something settle in her chest. Not the romantic version of settling, not the warm, uncomplicated feeling of a thing decided. Something more structural, the feeling of understanding a person at the level of what they'd actually built rather than what they'd said, which was the kind of understanding that lasted. Let me help you prepare, she said. He looked at her. I build strategies, she said. I understand how rooms work, how people in rooms work. You know the content. Let me help you think about the sequence. He looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then he pulled a chair to the desk beside his and she sat down, and they spent the next 2 hours working through it, together, not her leading, not him leading. A sound like green wood splitting, both of them, moving through the shape of what the morning required, with the focused efficiency of 2 people whose minds worked differently enough to cover each other's gaps. 7:30, Min knocked and told them the car would be ready at 8:45. Tae-gyeom put on his jacket. Naomi put on hers. They stood for a moment in the hallway outside the room, in the specific quiet before something begins. She straightened his collar. She didn't think about it. Before doing it, her hands just moved, the practical instinct of someone who noticed a thing that needed doing. He went still when she did it, the particular stillness of someone receiving a gesture they had not been prepared for. Okay, she said, stepping back. It was his word. She meant it the way he meant it. Something moved in his face. Okay, he said back. They went downstairs. The Lee Group tower on the harbor was exactly what it looked like from the outside, a building that had been designed to make you feel the weight of the institution before you got through the door. Glass and steel, and the specific vertical confidence of old money that had learned to dress in modern architecture. Naomi felt it when she walked in, the pressure of the place, and she filed it and kept her spine level. Min brought her to a conference room on the 14th floor, one below the boardroom with a long table, windows facing the harbor, and a phone connected to Tae-gyeom's. The room had been arranged by Min's people. There was coffee. There was a legal pad. There were 2 of Min's staff, quiet and positioned at the room's margins in the way of people whose job was to be available rather than visible. Tae-gyeom went up to the 15th floor alone. Naomi sat at the conference table and looked at the harbor and waited. The board meeting began at 10:04, which she knew because Min's phone received a text from someone in the room, and he told her without being asked. She appreciated that. She sat with her coffee and her legal pad, and she listened to the building around her, the sounds of an institution in motion, elevators, footsteps, the ambient mechanical hum of a structure built for productivity, and she kept her breathing even. 10:22, her phone buzzed. A text from a number she recognized as the secondary line Tae-gyeom had given her. It read, "He's in the room." Han Sung-jun had walked into the boardroom. She put the phone face down and pressed her palm against it for a moment. Then she turned it back over and waited. What happened in that boardroom, she reconstructed afterward from pieces, from Tae-gyeom's account, from Min's, from the single text message that arrived at 10:47 that said only wait, and from the quality of the silence on the 14th floor that seemed to thicken as the minutes moved. Tae-gyeom had walked into the boardroom at 10 o'clock to find 12 people and a chair at the head of the table that was already, pointedly, occupied by Hye-ran. She had not taken his seat as a power move, she had taken it as a statement of premise that this meeting was hers to run. He had not contested the seat. He had taken the chair to her right, which was the power position in any room where you understood that the head of the table was performing authority rather than holding it. Han Sung-jun was at the far end beside two of the senior advisors he had cultivated over years of careful proximity to family decisions. He had not looked at Tae-gyeom when he entered. Tae-gyeom had looked at him directly and steadily until he had no choice but to meet the gaze, and when he did, Tae-gyeom held it for 4 full seconds without expression and watched the lawyer understand that something had changed. Hye-ran had opened the meeting with the language of concern about the investigation, about the network's stability, about the need for clear leadership in uncertain conditions. She had been precise and she had been prepared, and she had been, as she always was, operating from the highest available ground. Tae-gyeom had let her finish. Then he had placed 3 documents on the table and asked Min's aide post-its outside to admit 2 guests. The first was his independent legal counsel, a woman named Park Ji-young who was not connected to the Lee family structure and who had been Tae-gyeom's private attorney for 6 years, known to no one in that room. She sat without greeting anyone. The second was a representative from the Federal Investigations Liaison Office, present not as enforcement but as confirmation that Lee Tae-gyeom had been cooperating voluntarily with the investigation for 4 months, had provided information material to the case against the former associate who was the investigation's actual primary subject, and had been formally cleared of primary liability 3 weeks prior, in a document that had not been shared with the family's legal counsel because Tae-gyeom had no obligation to share it with the family's legal counsel. The room had gone the specific quiet of a place where a significant number of people are revising their understanding of the situation simultaneously. Han Sung-jun had not moved. His hands were flat on the table, and his face was doing the work of a man who had been running a long play and was watching the board change in a way he had not modeled. Tae-gyeom had then placed a 4th document on the table, a communication record extracted from a serve the family's legal team used for internal correspondence. A series of messages between Han Sung-jun and a contact outside the family, outlining the strategy, feed investigation anxiety to the board, cultivate Hye-ran's existing concerns about Tae-gyeom's personal decisions, approach Chairman Park with the territorial offer, coordinate the hotel visit as a destabilizing event, time the board vote for maximum vulnerability. 22 years of proximity, 22 years of being the trusted instrument of a family's legal interests. And a plan that had been in construction, Min's team had determined, for nearly 3 years, predating the investigation entirely, predating Naomi, predating everything that had served as its public justification. Han Sung-jun had wanted the network's operational structure for himself, through Park as a front, and had simply been waiting for the right crisis to provide the architecture for Tae-gyeom's removal. "You've been planning this since before the investigation existed," Tae-gyeom said, in the boardroom, looking at the man who had been 22 years in his family's confidence. "You used my mother's legitimate concerns as a mechanism. You used the investigation as cover. You used a woman you had no right to contact as a pressure tool." His voice had not risen. It had done the opposite, gone quieter, more deliberate, the voice of someone who was being careful, because carelessness would not be precise enough for what he wanted to say. "You have been in this family's trust for 22 years. You have sat at tables where things were decided that were never decided lightly. You have been given access that was given on the assumption that trust was a two-directional structure. He looked at Han Sung-jun. It was not. Han Sung-jun said nothing. There was nothing to say. The documents were on the table. The liaison officer was in the room. The independent counsel was seated and watching. Hyran was looking at her lawyer of 22 years with an expression that Tae-gyeom would later describe to Naomi as the expression of a woman confronting the possibility that a mistake had been made, that she could not restructure through management. The specific, rare look of someone who had always been the most organized person in the room, discovering that organization had limits. She said, "Get out." She said it to Han Sung-jun, quietly, without drama. The way you said a thing when the saying of it was sufficient, and everything else was noise. Han Sung-jun stood. He picked up nothing from the table. He walked to the door and threw it, and that was the last time he was in a Lee family room. The board meeting continued for another 40 minutes after that. The vote on Tae-gyeom's position was called by Hyran herself not as an attack, but as a formality now, a thing that needed to be resolved so that the room could move forward on clear terms. The vote was 11-1 in his favor. The dissenting vote was one of Han Sung-jun's cultivated allies, a man who voted in the wrong direction and then understood, from the quality of the room's response, that his position in the structure had just become extremely tenuous. Tae-gyeom left the boardroom at 11:53. Naomi knew he was coming before the door opened because Min's phone received a text and Min looked up at her with the expression of someone delivering an outcome. She stood when the door opened. Tae-gyeom walked in. He looked like a man who had been in a high-pressure room for 2 hours and had come through it, but not easily. There was a tension in the set of his jaw that hadn't released yet. Tightness across his shoulders that was the physical residue of sustained focus. He looked at her and some of the tightness moved. "It's done," he said. She crossed the room and she put her arms around him, which was not a gesture she had planned, and was not a gesture that required planning. She felt him breathe one long breath, the kind that a person took when they had been managing their breathing for 2 hours and were finally in a space where they didn't have to anymore. His arms came around her. He held on. They stood like that in the conference room, full floor with the harbor outside the windows, and Min quietly relocating himself to the far end of the room, and Naomi feeling, against her chest, the specific deceleration of a man coming down from something he had been carrying at a very high altitude for a very long time. "Han Sung-jun," she said against his shoulder. "Out of the building," he said. "My counsel is coordinating with the investigation liaison. He'll have legal consequences. The timeline on that is," he paused, "not my concern anymore. It's in the right hands. Your mother." A breath, "She's in her office. She asked me to come down when I was ready." "Are you ready?" He was quiet for a moment. "Not yet." She nodded. She didn't let go. After another minute, he did. He looked at her face. He looked at her, the way he looked at things he was committed to understanding accurately. "Thank you," he said. "I was in a conference room," she said. "You were in the boardroom. You were in the building," he said. And the way he said, it made clear that the distinction he was drawing was not geographic. She understood. She had been at the doorway. "Go see your mother," she said. Hyran's office was at the corner of the building's executive floor, the kind of office that announced its occupant's stasis through restraint. Nothing excessive, nothing decorative, that wasn't also functional. She was standing at the window when Tae-gyeom came in looking at the harbor. She did not turn immediately. He sat down in one of the chairs in front of her desk. He waited. She turned eventually. She looked at her son, this man she had been managing and shaping and worrying over and fighting for the wrong version of since he was old enough to be managed. And she sat down, and she put her hands flat on her desk, and she said nothing for almost 30 seconds. "I didn't know," she said finally, "about Sung-jun's full intentions. I want you to know that." "I know," he said. "I used his concern," she said. "About the investigation, about your personal situation. I used his information because it served my purposes without asking carefully enough where it was coming from." She held his gaze. That was a failure of judgment. Tae-gyeom looked at his mother. This woman, who had built an empire from the position of a family's silent authority, who had controlled outcomes through patience and precision, and the willingness to apply pressure at exactly the right point, who had spent 40 years being the most organized person in every room. She was 71 years old and she was sitting at her desk and telling him she had made a mistake, and her voice was not performing contrition. It was simply delivering a fact, the way she delivered all facts. The directness of someone who considered honest accounting to be a form of self-respect. He had not expected that. He had expected defense negotiation, the reframing of intent. He had not expected the accounting. I know you've always been trying to protect the family, he said. I've been trying to control the family, she said. Those are not the same thing. I've been calling it protection for 40 years, because protection is a more acceptable motivation. She looked at the harbor. Your father never corrected me on that. You never corrected me on that. Everyone around me found it easier to accept the frame than to argue with it. She looked back at him. Seung-jun was the first person in 22 years to try to use that against me, and he nearly succeeded, which tells me the frame has been a liability for longer than I knew. Tae-gyeom sat with this. Hyun-woo, he said. She closed her eyes briefly. I know. What happened with Naomi was your doing as much as his. He is not a strong man. You raised him to not need to be strong because you were always there to absorb the decisions he couldn't make. I know, she said again. That needs to change. Yes. He looked at his mother, the woman you've been trying to remove from my life since she arrived. She spent last night helping me prepare for this morning. Not because I asked her to, because she understood what the morning required, and she had skills relevant to it, and she applied them. He held his mother's gaze. She is not a complication. She is a person, and I will not negotiate that. Hairan looked at her son for a long moment. She's nothing I would have chosen, she said. Not unkindly, honestly. She's not from this world. She doesn't understand it. She'll find parts of it. She can't reconcile with who she is. She already has, he said. She chose to stay anyway. That was her decision, not mine. And when it becomes difficult, then it'll be difficult, he said. I'm not looking for something without friction. I'm looking for something real. His mother looked at him. And then she did something he hadn't seen her do. In years, she looked away first. Not in defeat, not in submission. In the specific acknowledgement of someone who has run an argument to its end and found the end is not where they expected. I would like to meet her, Hairan said. Properly. Not as a variable to be managed. That depends on her, he said. Not on me. The conversation ended shortly after. It didn't resolve everything. Decades of family architecture didn't restructure in 50 minutes, and Tae-gyeom was not expecting it to. But something had shifted in the room's foundation, and foundations were where lasting things began. He found Naomi in the lobby. She was sitting in a chair near the building's entrance, her bag beside her, her phone in her hand, looking at something on the screen. She looked up when she heard him coming across the lobby floor. She looked at his face, reading it the way she always read his face thoroughly, without rushing. How was she? Naomi asked. Honest, he said, which is not always how she is. Naomi nodded slowly. They walked out of the building together into the cold harbor air, and the city moved around them the way it always moved, loud and salt-smelling and indifferent to everything they had just come through. 3 days later, Hyun-woo found Naomi. Not at the hotel. She had checked out of the hotel and moved into the small guest apartment in Min's building that Tae-gyeom had arranged, which was another threshold she had crossed and filed, and not examined too carefully. Hyun-woo texted first, asking if they could meet. She said yes because she had always been a fair person, and fair people had the necessary conversations. They met at a cafe near the waterfront, public and neutral. Hyun-woo looked like a man who had been living inside his own decisions for a week and was beginning to understand their full weight. He looked, she thought, more like himself than he had in the estate's sitting room, less managed, less positioned. Just the person underneath the arrangement. He ordered coffee. He held it. He didn't drink it for a long time. I ended the engagement, he said. I know Yi-seol had texted her, brief and clean. It's done. I'm going to Italy for 6 months. Thank you for the conversation. My mother is. He stopped. She's adjusting. She's good at adjusting, Naomi said. He looked at the table. I owe you more than an apology. I know that. What I did wasn't. He stopped again. Tried a different direction. I told myself I was protecting you from a complication. From a family situation that was too complicated to explain. He looked up at her. That was a lie, I was telling myself. The truth is I was afraid. Of my mother, of the family, of what would happen if I stood up. He held her gaze. I am still afraid of those things, but I understand now that afraid doesn't explain it. It just describes where I was standing. Naomi looked at him. This man she had loved in the specific way you loved someone, who called you at midnight to show you harbor fog, who asked questions and listened to the answers, who was genuinely kind and genuinely weak and had caused her genuine damage through the combination of those two things. I know, she said. Is there anything I can... No, she said. Not harshly. Precisely. There isn't anything to fix between us. It's finished, Hyunwoo. That's not anger. That's just the truth. She looked at him steadily. What you can do is figure out what you actually want. Not what's arranged for you. Not what's expected. What you want for yourself, and then have the courage to go get it. She paused. You're not a bad person. You're a person who let fear make all his decisions. That's correctable. He nodded. His eyes were red at the corners. Thank you, he said, for saying that. I mean it, she said. I'm not performing generosity. I genuinely hope you build something you chose. She picked up her bag. Take care of yourself, Hyunwoo. She walked out of the cafe. Stood on the front for a moment, with the harbor in front of her and the city at her back, and felt the specific weight of a chapter, closing not with drama, not with a clean resolution, but with the honest, imperfect, sufficient feeling of something that had been completed and could be set down. She pulled out her phone. She opened the document she'd started in the hotel room fax. Interpretations, open questions, and she scrolled to the bottom of the open questions column, the longest one, and she looked at the final item she had typed. At 5 in the morning on the worst night, is what I'm feeling real enough to survive honest information. She typed one word beneath it. Yes. She closed the document. She walked back toward the city. The conversation with Hiran happened 10 days later, at the estate. Not the formal sitting room, a smaller room off the garden, one that Naomi suspected was more genuinely Hiran's than the estate's public spaces. There was tea. There was afternoon light coming through a window. Splitting. There was the particular quality of two women in a room who had already said a version of everything to each other through proxies and were now attempting the direct version. Hiran poured the tea herself. That was the first thing Naomi noted. They sat. They drank. The silence lasted long enough, to be honest. You're not what I expected, Hiran said. You told me that the morning after I arrived, Naomi said. You said I was composed. I meant it as a categorization, Hiran said. I mean it differently now. She looked at her tea. I mean that you're not what I expected a woman in your position to do with the situation you were in. What did you expect? Hiran was quiet for a moment. Anger, demands, or alternatively, the specific kind of patience that was really waiting for something. She looked at Naomi. You did neither. I was angry, Naomi said. I had the anger on my own time. The corner of Hiran's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the acknowledgement of one. I want you to understand something, Hiran said. My objections to you were not about who you are. She held Naomi's gaze. They were about what I couldn't control. That's a distinction that reflects poorly on me, not on you, and I'm making it plainly because I think you deserve the accurate version. Naomi's looked at this woman still formidable, still the most organized presence in any room she occupied, still someone who had operated for decades from the premise that control was care. Sitting across a small table with afternoon light on her hands, making a precise accounting of herself. I know the difference, Naomi said. I knew it in the hallway that morning. Then you were ahead of me, Hiran said, which was, from this woman, something very close to extraordinary. They talked for another hour. Not about Tae-gyeom specifically. About the family's history, about Hiran's years of building the business from a position that was not always recognized, about Naomi's grandmother and the kind of women who came from women who had never had the option of waiting for the world to arrange itself politely. The conversation was not warm in the uncomplicated sense, but it was real. and real had always been what Naomi could work with. She left the estate with nothing resolved, on paper, and everything slightly different in substance, which was how actual things changed. A month later, Naomi Caldwell registered a business in South Korea. It was not a large operation, a consulting entity, brand strategy focused. 2 part-time employees, a Korean designer she'd connected with through a referral, and a logistics coordinator she'd hired specifically because the woman had told Naomi at the interview that she had opinions and intended to share them. She liked people with opinions. She had always understood that the best rooms had people in them who pushed back. The office was in a commercial space in the hillside neighborhood. The one Tae-gyeom had described, the one with the houses close enough to hear through walls, the cramped kitchens, the particular human density of a place that didn't have room to perform. The space had been empty for 2 years. The building's owner, an older man who knew Tae-gyeom from 20 years of proximity in the neighborhood, gave her a fair lease without negotiating against her, and then told her that the building had good bones, and she should trust the bones. She trusted the bones. Tae-gyeom saw the space for the first time after she'd been in it for a week, after the desk was set up and the one plant she'd bought for the window was establishing itself, and the wall where she'd hung her first client whiteboard was covered in the particular organized chaos of a strategy in progress. He stood in the doorway. He looked at the room. He looked at her in it. "You built it," he said. "I'm building it," she said. "There's a difference." "Yes," he said. "There is." And his voice had the quality of someone for whom that distinction meant something specific and personal. He came into the office and looked at the whiteboard and asked questions, the real kind, the kind that required her to think rather than just explain, and she answered them and asked them back. And it was not unlike the 2 hours they had spent at the desk in the safe house at 5 in the morning, which had been the first time. She understood what it would mean to work alongside a mind like his. They ate dinner at his friend's kitchen in the hillside neighborhood that evening. The friend's wife made the same food she apparently always made, and the table was too small for the number of people around it. And the conversation moved between Korean and English in a way that excluded Naomi on the linguistic surface and included her entirely in the substance. And at some point, Tae-gyeom translated something that made the whole table laugh, and Naomi laughed too, a beat behind, and the gap between the laugh and the understanding closed. On a Tuesday evening in early winter, 6 weeks after the board meeting, Tae-gyeom asked her to walk with him along the harbor. Cold. She had a better jacket now. She had learned her lesson about Busan's coastal air. They walked with their hands in their respective pockets for the first few minutes, and then his hand came out of his pocket, and he took hers, and they walked that way, with the harbor running alongside and the city lit in the specifics of cities at night, when the light catches the water and multiplies it. He stopped at a section of the harbor path where the waterfront widened into a kind of informal plaza, stone benches, a view south along the coastline, the city behind, and the sea ahead. He stopped and turned to face her. She looked at him. He looked like himself, which was the best version of him, not the managed version, not the one that held everything carefully calibrated. Just the man who had spoken to her through a door at midnight, who had walked a coastal trail without performing the walk, who had placed his palm flat on a table and waited. "I want to ask you something," he said. She kept her eyes on his face. "Okay." He reached into his jacket pocket. He brought out a small box. It was not elaborate. The box was simple, dark, the size of something that contained exactly one thing. He opened it. The ring was not what she might have expected from a man of his means. It was not large or ostentatious, or designed to announce itself. It was a single stone, deep and dark and brilliant at the center, set in a band that was clean and architectural, the kind of ring that would look right on a hand, that worked and thought and built things, rather than a hand posed for display. She had the sudden certainty that he had chosen it himself, specifically, with the knowledge of the hand it was meant for. He did not drop to one knee. He stood, which was right for him, which was honest. He held the box between them. "I'm not offering you an arrangement," he said. His voice was quiet and very steady. "I'm not offering you access to something you need to negotiate your way into. I'm not asking you to become the wife of a complicated man and accept the complications as the price." He looked at her. I'm asking if you want to build something with me. Not inside my world and not inside yours. Something that would be ours, that we'd have to figure out as we went, that neither of us would be able to control very well. He paused. That's a realistic offer. I want you to have a realistic offer. Naomi stood on the harbor path in the winter air and looked at this ring and at this man, and she felt the full weight of the last 2 months pressing into the present moment, not as burden, as context. The suitcase, the sitting room, the teacup, the 2 words through a doorway, the trail above the water, the safe house table at midnight, the document spread across a desk at 5 in the morning, conference room with harbor windows and a phone connected to a line above her. She had come to South Korea to step toward a future she had been told was waiting for her. She had found a different one, not handed to her, not arranged. Arrived at through the specific accumulation of every honest decision she had made since she walked into a sitting room and picked up her suitcase. She thought about her grandmother at midnight, folding laundry, saying, "Precise is for people who respect themselves." She looked at Tae-gyeom. She took the ring from the box herself and held it in her own hand for a moment, turning it. Then she put it on her own finger, which felt like the right version of the gesture, something received on her own terms rather than placed there. "Yes," she said. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. He reached out and touched the side of her face, one hand, careful, the gesture of someone who understood that the thing they were touching was worth being careful with. She leaned into it. They stood on the harbor path in the winter dark, with the city lit behind them and the CT moving ahead of them, and they did not say anything else for a long time, because some moments were not improved by language. The wet was small, 6 months later, coastal. A villa on Jeoje Island that Tae-gyeom had used as a retreat for years, the place he had described to her once as the only space in his life that had no agenda attached to it. 30 people. Min was there. Tae-gyeom's friend from the hillside neighborhood was there, wife and 2 children, and the specific beaming approval of someone who had watched a man be lonely for too long. Naomi's mother flew in from Atlanta, had come 2 months before to meet Tae-gyeom, had spent 4 days in Busan watching him with the focused assessment of a woman who had raised a daughter alone and was not interested in mistakes at this stage, and had said to Naomi on the last night, with the particular economy of someone who didn't waste words, "He's not easy. Nothing worth having is." Dija was there, wearing something spectacular, and crying before the ceremony began, which she would deny for years. Hyran came. She sat in the front row with the composed posture of someone who had chosen to be present rather than been required to be, which was a different thing, and she watched her eldest son with the expression of a woman revising a long-held position in real time, which was the hardest possible kind of revision to watch someone make, and also, Naomi thought, the most human. Hyunwoo was not there. He had sent a note, handwritten, brief, without flourish. It said that he hoped she was happy, and that he was working on figuring out what he wanted, which she believed, and that he thought she'd found something real, which she knew. Yasul sent flowers from Italy with a card that said only, "You showed me what walking away looks like. I'm using it." The ceremony was not elaborate. They had written their own words, which for Tae-gyeom meant something short and precise, because he was not a man who used many words, and the words he chose to use meant more for their scarcity. He said that he had spent many years in rooms where he was the most powerful person, and had found that power without witness was a particular kind of solitude, and that what she had given him was the thing that power could not buy, and could not arrange someone who saw him clearly and had chosen him anyway, and whose choosing of him was entirely her own. She said that she had come to Korea expecting one life and had found a different one, and that the one she had found was harder than the one she had expected and more real, and that she had learned through the specific and difficult process of the last 8 months that real was what she wanted. She said that she was still building her agency and her career and her sense of what was possible, and that she intended to build them on her own, and that she intended to build them beside him, and that she understood those were not contradictory things. The evening came down over Jeoje Island with the specific patience of coastal evenings, light moving off the water in long sheets of copper, and then the deep blue that preceded dark. Naomi stood on the villa's balcony with Tae-gyeom's arm around her shoulders and Busan somewhere on the horizon across the water, its lights already beginning to gather in the distance. She thought about the woman who had boarded a plane in Atlanta with a suitcase full of gifts and a card in Korean she'd spent 3 evenings writing and a heart full of plans for a future she had been very certain about. That woman had been careful and precise and wrong about the most important part. She did not regret her. She had needed to be that woman to become this one. She thought about the sitting room, the teacup, the ring on another woman's hand. She thought about picking up her suitcase and the specific feeling of deciding to leave with her dignity rather than stay and lose it. She had almost made it to the door. "You've gone somewhere," Tae-gyeom said beside her. "The sitting room," she said. "The first day. What about it?" "I almost walked out." "I know." His arm tightened slightly. "I almost let you." She looked up at him. "What stopped you?" He was quiet for a moment, looking at the water. "You picked up your suitcase," he said. "And you looked at Hyun-woo, and your face," he paused. "Your face had grief in it, but not a single ounce of self-pity. And I thought, this is the kind of person who does not come through a door twice." He looked at her. "I could not watch that person walk out of my life before I'd had the chance to see what it meant that she'd walked in." Naomi felt something in her chest warm and steady, the feeling of a thing well-founded. She turned toward the water. Busan's lights were gathering on the horizon, distant and bright and permanent-looking, the way city lights always looked from water, as if the city had always been there, as if it would always be, as if everything that happened inside it was tiny against the fact of the light itself. She had arrived as the woman one man was too weak to choose. She was standing here as the woman who had chosen herself, step by step, decision by decision, a sound like green wood splitting, with every piece of accurate information she could gather and every ounce of precision her grandmother had taught her to respect. And beside her was a man who had not chosen her for her, who had waited at a doorway and told her the truth and let her decide, and kept letting her decide, and had understood from the beginning that the deciding was the only part that mattered. The water moved below them. The city held its light. Naomi Caldwell, now also Lee, though she would use both names, or neither, depending on the room, because that was her call to make breathed in the salt air of the place that had broken her and remade her and kept her, and she felt, with the full weight of everything it had cost to arrive here, precisely where she was. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was hers.